Chapter 738. As Li Dong approached, a strange old man appeared at the Xiamawi post house. His white eyebrows were long and slender like willows. Shenyuan Qingfeng only knew that this old man had barged into the courtyard a few days ago, and had a few words with Su Fengnian. After that, he left the hospital and returned. These days, Su Fengnian had changed. He still ate, talked and slept, but Shenyuan Qingfeng still felt that something was wrong. The snow gradually stopped. Youth Wu placed the snowman that had been moved to the corridor back into the courtyard. Today, the clouds parted and the world was suddenly illuminated. Su Fengnian was lying on a rattan chair. The white-browed ancestor of unknown identity was nowhere to be seen. The snowman stood under the dragon claw locust tree, and Su Fengnian stared at it in a daze. Shenyuan Qingfeng moved a rattan chair to the side, and after lying down, he rocked back and forth, babbling. When a woman stood up, she stuck out her chest, causing her twin peaks to rise. That was nothing, but when she lay down, it was especially spectacular, showing her true elegance. Shenyuan Qingfeng asked, "Who's that old man?" These days, Su Fengnian would answer every question. He didn't put on a stern face for anyone. Instead, his temper gradually improved. He only said that he would exchange arms with Li Chungang. Shenyuan Qingfeng began to stir up trouble again. "Isn't old sword godly half your master? Your enemy is right in front of you. Why don't you draw your sword?" Su Fengnian laughed softly. One sword, one sword. Why would Li Chungang need others to avenge him? Besides, old Huang is his disciple. Shenyuan Qingfeng frowned. The toothless Jian Huang is this old man's disciple? Su Fengnian nodded. Shenyuan Qingfeng hesitated for a moment. In the end he still asked, "What happened?" Su Fengnian stared straight at the snowman. Just before Shenyuan Qingfeng's patience reached its limit, he said, "Shenyuan Qingfeng, your dream is to become a martial artist like Wang Xianji? To become the Empress of Liang Lake? But I know that this is something that happened after the Battle of Bulgang. What was your earlier dream?" Shenyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "My father can walk into my mother's courtyard and drink the osmanthus wine together during the mid-autumn reunion." Su Fengnian returned the favor and said with a smile, "When I was young, my dream was to be a hero who punishes evil. It doesn't matter if I use a sword or a saber, but I must uphold justice. First, I must avenge my mother. Then, I will go to Jianghu and make a name for myself. It would be best if I could find a good woman like my mother in Jianghu." At that time, I didn't think about whether I would become the king of Bailiang in the future, because I never thought that Su Xiao would grow old. Then he stretched out his finger and pointed at the snowman. "The dream is that little snowman. It can't be sold for money. Only children would treat it as a treasure and wouldn't trade it even if there were mountains of gold and silver. But at our age, most people don't like to talk about dreams anymore. They feel that it's pretentious and unrealistic. Take me for example. I don't have any hope in my dream of becoming a hero in Jianghu. You and I are just trying to cheat each other and trade with each other. In the future, those Jianghu people who rely on Bailiang will only be sold based on their abilities to get an official position. What I said on the royal road earlier isn't a dream. It's a responsibility. Your dream now isn't a dream either. It's an ambition. Among the people I know, only 2 people really have dreams, and they haven't changed after all these years. But our dreams, once the snowman melts under the sun, it's gone. Their dreams are that even if the snowman is gone this year, they will wait for the heavy snow next year to make another snowman, year after year." Shenyuan Qingfeng said with a smile, "One of them is Zhang and I, who wants to kill you, and the other is Wenhua, who only wants to be a swordsman and be able to afford an iron sword." Su Fengnian nodded. "That's right. When you grow up, you feel that your dreams are very childish. Those aren't dreams at all." Su Fengnian said calmly, "Wenhua is a fool who values his dreams more than his life. It's because he has something valuable that I don't have that I admire him. Smart people like to laugh at others for not shedding tears until they see the coffin. Wenhua has always been that fool who is laughed at. When he was young, he carved bamboo swords, perhaps because he was laughed at by his family. When he grew up, he still carried a wooden sword, which was laughed at by his fellow villagers. After I met him, I also laughed at him every now and then for his one-track mind and that he deserved to be a good-for-nothing. After we separated, sometimes I thought of Wenhua. I felt that if this kid were to roam the Jianghu one day and was really killed, I would definitely avenge him and wipe out his enemies. This time, that Wen Buxing who appeared in the capital, I actually didn't want it to be Wen Hua. It's not that I'm afraid that my brother will steal the limelight, but I also practice swordsmanship and martial arts. I know better than anyone what I want to gain and what I have to pay. I, Su Fengnian, am the heir of Beiliang. Many of the things that I have to pay may sound very frightening, but because of my strong family background, it's not like I won't be able to climb up in the future. But who is Wen Hua? He's just an ordinary commoner. What can he pay other than his dreams that are more important than his life? Beiliang's foundation is already under the covetous eyes of Bei Mang in Liang. They can't afford to lose a single battle, let alone Wen Hua. Shenyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, therefore, Wen Hua is Wen Buxing. Su Fengnian stood up and walked to the old locust tree to squat down. Su Fengnian followed behind him as if he was possessed by gods and gods. Reaching out, he dug out a handful of snow from the ground and piled it on top of the snowman. He lightly patted it a few times. Wen Hua's 2 sword moves were taught by Huang Sonjia on his behalf. He is the great benefactor who made Wen Hua's dreams come true. Huang Sonjia wanted him to kill me. If it were you who wanted to kill me, regardless of whether you succeeded or not, you would have a very high chance of escaping unscathed. Shenyuan Qingfeng, what would you do? Chapter 739. Ordinary women would find it extremely difficult to wear pure colored clothes. Black and white were fine, but red and purple were as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Shenyuan Qingfeng was able to subdue Zi, which showed how outstanding her appearance and temperament were. She thought for a moment and laughed. Nonsense, I'll definitely kill you without hesitation. Even if you sold me the Imperial Jade Seal and let me take advantage of you, if Huang Longsha stood in front of me today and said that he could help me become an Earth Immortal in a few years without any worries, I'd kill you without hesitation. At most, I'd leave your corpse intact for the sake of our old friendship. Su Fengnian laughed and raised his head. You and I still have old friendship to reminisce about? Shenyuan Qingfeng didn't sprinkle salt on his wound. However, it was more appropriate to describe the current situation as adding frost to snow. Su Fengnian kept adding snow to the snowman. For some reason, Shenyuan Qingfeng felt a surge of anger and kicked the snowman to pieces. Su Fengnian stood up. The old man who came to deliver the message that night was lying on his rattan chair. Shenyuan Qingfeng waved her hand, indicating for Su Fengnian to scram out of the courtyard. She then started building the snowman again. Su Fengnian lay on the chair next to the old man. One old and one young. There was a great difference in age between them, probably 4 or 5 generations. The old man's eyebrows fluttered in the wind as he placed a hand on his white eyebrows and slowly rubbed them. In my life, the only thing I like is swordsmanship, and I only ask the enemy's strongest sword. The Wu family's sword tomb boasted of being number 1 in swordsmanship in the world, and I made the Su of Gojoseon unable to show his face. When Dong Tai was young, he struggled at death's door in Sword Mountain. I didn't teach this child any swordsmanship, only telling him to go get a sword if he didn't want to. But in the end, Dong Tai still chose to walk the path of swordsmanship. This is the stubbornness of his mother's womb, and I can't do anything about it. Below the demon-slaying platform on Mount Longhu, I went to ask Li Chungang about his sword Dao. Exchanging sword Dao was like exchanging an arm. We were enemies, but at the same time, we were half friends. My second disciple, who was your coachman in Beiliang Palace, Huang Jintu, who traveled with you, had extraordinary talent. Compared to my first disciple, it was like comparing their statuses. One was a blacksmith, and the other was the imperial uncle of West Shu. They were worlds apart. However, I valued Huang Jintu more because his sword was closer to the way. In fact, the eldest disciple defended the nation with his sword. Even before he died, he did not manage to deliver a decent strike. Instead, it was the second disciple, the 9th saber, whom you named 6,000 miles, who impressed me with his 9th strike. Lao Qianbei, Su Fengnian asked. Lao Qianbei, Lao Huang's 6 hidden swords, are they all for you? The old man was in a good mood. He nodded with a smile and said, this fool doesn't have the shackles of status. Therefore, no matter how he practices the sword, it's all about the word, love. The clumsy bird flies first. Instead, he's more promising than his senior brother. He visited Martial Emperor City twice. The first time, He wanted the world to know his master's name. The second time, he hoped that I, his master, would know that it's not shameful to have such a clumsy disciple. Su Fengnian said, what he practices is the sword, and what he's returning is kindness. The old man smiled and said, I've made 3 bets with Huang Longshi in my life. He bet that the consort of the king of Bailiang would enter the realm of sword immortal during the battle in the palace. He bet that Li Chungang, who was imprisoned in the tide listening pavilion, would enter the realm of earth immortal. The third bet was that Wan Hua would not practice the sword. Finally, I won once at the last moment. Otherwise, I would also have the nickname of Sui Bushing. The old man didn't need to look at Su Fengnian. He went straight to the point and said, there's no need to waste your time thinking about who this old man's surname Sui is. Even Huang Longshi doesn't know my real name. It's strange. I've made a few exchanges with Huang Longshi, but I still can't see what he wants. Back then, during the white clothes case in the capital, the Zhao family wanted to cut off the bloodline of the Su family. Yuan Benshi and the old emperor of the Zhao family were the masterminds. Yang Taisui could be considered half an accomplice. Huang Longshi bet that your mother Wu Su would enter the realm of sword immortal. He also used a famous sword in exchange for me to come out of seclusion, just in case, to protect the lives of the 2 of you. I divulged the heavenly secret not because I don't want you to bear a grudge against Huang Longshi. That old man should have died long ago. He's been fanning the flames everywhere. I just don't want him to die in the hands of small fries. The old man sighed deeply and said, in my opinion, there are only 2 types of moves in the world that are useful and good-looking. Li Xiaoxin's yellow river hanging above Dao Sek's head belongs to the good-looking category. There's no other way. After all, he's still a member of the 3 sections. The Wu family's Su of Gojoseon's scattered stars in the sky is also good-looking but not useful. If you really want to explain it, it's like facing 10,000 enemies. Killing 300 and injuring 600 with 1 sword move can't compare to killing 500 with 1 sword move. Li Chuangong's 2-sleeved green snake is a little different. It's good-looking and useful. Back then, when I asked Li Chungang about the 2-sleeved green snake, I didn't want to ask about the 2-sleeved green snake. However, Li Chuangong's state of mind was damaged and couldn't open the heaven's gate. But in terms of the power of the sword moves, the 2-sleeved green snake was still at its peak. Back then, when I asked and answered the sword, even if one of our arms was cut off, I still left in high spirits and returned in high spirits. There's no grudge to speak of. Su Fengnian asked curiously, then Wang Xianji claims to be second in the world. The old man laughed and said, to be humble, even if Ancestor Lu's reincarnation, Dragon Tiger Qi Xuanzhen, and Wudong's Hong Shixiang, they would only be evenly matched. Only Ancestor Lu, who passed through the Heaven's Gate 800 years ago, would have a 70% chance of winning. Su Fengnian kept his mouth shut. The old man said softly, in the martial world that we live in, there's no martial world where the more we mix, the more the tide will rise. The old man gently stretched out his hand, and the spring and autumn sword, which was thrown outside the city by Su Fengnian and kept in the imperial palace, flashed and instantly appeared in the old man's hand. Back then, I couldn't determine the victor between me and Li Chungang, and I've always had a knot in my heart. Since you have the quintessence of Li Chuangong's 2 swords, especially the one that opened the Heaven's Gate, I'll teach you a sword move. When we determine the victor in the future, go to Li Chuangong's grave and propose a toast. For this sword, I'll only take a scabbard. Keep the sword for me. I'm going to martial Emperor City. When the spring and autumn sword returns to its scabbard is when I teach you that sword move. The old man threw the scabbard into the air and flew away on his sword. Clear laughter spread through Great Peace City. There are 3 million sword immortals in the sky, but they all have to bow before me. Chapter 740. Clouds hung low in the sky above the capital, a large expanse of gorgeous burning clouds. The woman's purple robes dragged across the snowy ground. In the end, she still piled up a crooked snowman. Su Fengnian lay on the rattan chair and asked with a smile, how many purple robes did you bring? Back in the day, when I listened to the old men in Tide Listening Pavilion talk about the legends of Zhonghu, I was always curious about how those white-robed swordsmen dressed themselves. Last time I went to Bai Mang, at Tuma Pass, I saw one. Now I'm puzzled. In the future, when you walk the martial arts world, are you determined to only wear purple robes? But speaking of which, although there are many colors in the world, there are only so many pure colors. The green robes have Chao Chongqing, and the white robes have Chen Jibao. When it comes to a junior like you, there aren't many colors to choose from. Shenyuan Qingfeng seemed to be very satisfied with the little snowman. Smiling, he stood up and clapped his hands, restraining his smile. Don't you think about why that sword-eating old man surnamed Sui came to the Demoyai post house? Is he up to no good? Taking 10,000 steps back, Huang Longshi's kung fu is even above Chao Chongqing's. Other than Wen Hua's broken sword, which wounds are more severe than sword strikes, does Huang Longshi really not have any other tricks up his sleeve? If you were to be killed in the capital, whether it's the Chuanqiu remnant rebels who hate the king of Beiliang or the hidden forces in Beimang, I'm sure they would all clap their hands and cheer. How could it be just a big white robe? Furthermore, I don't see you paying any attention to the Lidong Imperial Assembly or the coronation of a prince. These days, you've only been holed up in this post house. Don't you feel suffocated? Su Fengnian glanced at the pitiful snowman and sat up with a smile. Then let's go out for a walk? Su Xiao mentioned some wonderful snacks. I also want to try them, but I don't think they're good enough for me. Even a seat would be dirty. Shenyuan Qingfeng wanted to retort, but he swallowed the words at the tip of his tongue and laughed softly. You and I aren't the same kind of people. Su Fengnian nodded and said, That's right. You should follow the restaurants and inns on the streets outside Ma Wei. The scholars of the capital are the same kind of people. Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him, but he remembered something. 2 days ago, this guy had suddenly become interested and wanted to go out to buy a rare type of yellow wine. It was still snowing heavily, and the courtyards and pavilions on both sides of the street had long been occupied by people from all walks of life in the capital. Shenyuan Qingfeng and Su Fengnian went out together. Other than Lu Wanbao, who continued to tremble under the dragon claw locust tree, there was a pair of old and young beggars further away from Ma Wei. When Shenyuan Qingfeng saw Su Fengnian walking towards them, he originally thought that Su Fengnian was putting on an act of tipping them. He didn't expect that Su Fengnian would only kick the old beggar, as if disdaining the old beggar for blocking his way. Shenyuan Qingfeng didn't think too much about it at the time, but after the two of them walked for a while, they saw many people running out of the buildings. Not only did they leave large amounts of silver behind, they also sent fox fur coats and food. The previously empty bowl was immediately filled with shining silver, and there were even a few banknotes. Later on, when the two of them returned from buying wine, they heard from Ma Wei In's Tong Ziliang that the grandfather and grandson, who had been begging on this street for many years, had already been taken to a luxurious mansion with vermilion gates and high walls by a wealthy gentleman. He rewarded the old beggar with a carefree job, and that wealthy gentleman won the praise of nearly half of the capital on that day. Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He then looked at Su Fengnian, who had only lightly kicked him back then, and somewhat understood. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked on the road that had been swept clean of snow. Beggars from other places were squatting on both sides of the street. Most of them were young men who had nothing better to do. They could only stare at the heir of Beiliang, hating themselves for not daring to block his path and being kicked or slapped in the face. Shenyuan Qingfeng remembered when he watched his father brew wine when he was young. His father had once said, "The lantern of the Ho family is bright and the moon of the poor family is bright." I have always been considered to be extremely insightful. The lantern of the Ho family is bright, but the moon of the poor family is bright for 1,000 years. Only then can I see the true state of the world. Su Fengnian heard Shenyuan Qingfeng mumbling to himself. He asked, "What are you mumbling about?" Shenyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, "I pity you." Su Fengnian laughed softly. "Do I need you to pity me?" At the corner of the street that led to Xiama Wei, in the opposite direction of Su Fengnian and Shenyuan Qingfeng's group, there was a carriage parked there. The curtain was lifted, revealing a woman's appearance that could be described as peerless. The weight of these 4 words was clearly more important than the so-called beauty that could cause the downfall of a country. In terms of rouge, she did not lose to Nangong. Other than this beauty, there was also a mother and daughter who were far less beautiful than her. The daughter had freckles on the tip of her nose and did not hide her hostility towards her. The mother had a calm demeanor and was a model of motherhood. The average-looking woman said softly, "So you really have a head of white hair." There was a heavy snowfall in the capital region, which signaled a bountiful year. The faces of the people who entered and exited the city were filled with joy. Even the guards at the city gate, who had always been cautious and prudent as the first principle of official cultivation, had a joyous expression on their faces. Great Peace City accepted hundreds of rivers, and the guards at the city gate had seen many strange people. However, today, a man and a woman still made the guards take a few more glances at them. The girl's appearance was not that beautiful. The beauties in the capital were confusing, and she was at most an average person, which made it hard for people to remember her. However, the young monk beside the girl was not ordinary. His kasaya was dyed red and green, which was not commonly seen in the capital. One had to have great merit to be able to wear it. The little monk's lips were red and his teeth were white, which attracted a lot of attention along the way. Now that the imperial court was destroying Buddhism, monks were no different from street rats. However, the little monk's demeanor was calm. He approached the city gate and handed over 2 different residence certificates to the guards. The girl behind him tiptoed around and pinched a soft snowball that was not very sturdy. She jumped up and smashed it on his head. Many of the snowballs splashed into the collar of the kasaya. It was so cold that the little monk shivered and turned his head with a bitter expression. The girl made a face. After the guards took the residence certificate, they looked at the little monk and did not dare to act rashly. They quickly reported it to the guards at the city gate. After verifying that there were no mistakes, they sent the gift into the city. Oh my, this little monk was a proper preaching monk at the 2 Zen temples. He was also so young. Who knew if he would become Buddha in the future? Burning incense and praying to Bodhisattva was a matter of sincerity. The gods were all respectful and carefully escorted him. They all wanted to get more Buddha's aura so that they could bring it back to protect their families. Destroying Buddhism was the business of the imperial court officials. They were small fish and shrimp, and could not afford to offend the Bodhisattva. The little monk saw that the girl was going to pinch snowballs on the side of the road again and asked with a bitter expression, "You little thing, you've been smashing me since it started snowing. The snow has already stopped. Haven't you smashed enough? If it's enough, of course I won't smash you. Do you need to ask? Tell me, aren't you stupid? Stupid north and south?" The little monk hugged his head and let her smash it. "Don't block it." After saying that, she went to pinch snowballs again. This time, she pinched 2 snowballs in one breath. Stupid North and South gathered his courage and said, "I only have this one kasaya. If you dirty it and wash it, I won't be able to wear it for a few days. If you delay my preaching in the palace, I'll be really angry. I'll make you angry. I'll make you angry." With 2 smacking sounds, Stupid North and South's bald head, who did not dare to block it with his hands, was hit by 2 more snowballs. Stupid North and South rubbed his bald head. When he saw her puffed-up cheeks, he thought carefully and said, "I'm not angry." The girl looked at him seriously. It seemed that he was really not angry. This made her a little depressed. She ran to pinch snowballs again. She jumped up with a smile and smacked it again. Stupid North and South saw that she smiled for the first time since the old abbot passed away. She should really not be angry. Li Dong wiped his hands with his sleeves. These days, he had been playing crazily all the way here. He had been dealing with snow, so his hands were frozen red and swollen. He looked at the seemingly endless imperial road and sighed. "How do you think we can find Su Fengnian? I heard from father that there are millions of people in the capital." Stupid North and South smiled brightly and said, "When we enter the palace, I'll help you ask." "Can you do it?" "Yes." "If you can't find him, do you believe that I'll let you start rolling a snowball from the gate behind us all the way to the gate on the other side?" "I can agree, but I don't know martial arts. I can't roll such a big snowball." "You're so stupid. Can you be the abbot of our temple?" "Sigh, I'm also worried." "Look, it's the rouge shop. I'm worried." Stupid North and South. Turn your head and say, "What are you worried about?" "I'll make you worry." "Stand still and don't move. I'll smack you to death." Li Dong, look, the rouge shop is closing. Hurry. Chapter 741. Su Fengnian's group walked quietly in the small alley. Icicles hung from the eaves of the houses. Wu broke 2 of them and held them in his hand, jumping up and down to play with them. They passed by a small courtyard with 2 entrances. Coincidentally, the door was not closed. Perhaps the children in the courtyard were still playing outside and had not yet returned home to eat. Looking around, there was a red copper pot on the square table in the room. The charcoal fire burned brightly and smoke curled up. Because it was a small family in a small courtyard, there were not many variations to the mutton pot. It was enough to get rid of the wind and cold. It could not compare to the variety of dishes that could be used in large houses. Wu listened to the sound of the charcoal crackling and the water boiling. He sniffled. It was so fragrant. There were too many families in Great Peace City that had fallen from grace. These people had left and never returned, but they were still picky. This caused the capital to have too many rules. They did not eat from time to time and did not overstep the rules. They were very particular about what they ate. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I know a good place to eat mutton in Dragon Whisker Ditch. Let's go try it?" Shenyuan Qingfeng frowned and said, "I don't eat mutton. It smells disgusting." Su Fengnian shook his head and said with a smile, "That's because you haven't eaten good mutton. The good mutton in Great Peace City is all black-headed white sheep from the mountains. The meat used is from the back of the sheep's neck. A sheep can't produce more than a few taels of this meat. It's not fishy, not smelly, and not greasy. Even if you have the money, you can't buy it in Mount Hui. Even worse is the meat from the tip of the sheep's buttocks. The next few mutton dishes are called big and small cucumber strips. They can't be eaten by particular people. The restaurant we went to only serves the first 2 dishes. It said that the chef can cut a caddy of meat into 81 slices. So the restaurant is called Jojo Restaurant. Everything is authentic, but it's a bit expensive. There might not be a seat for us at the restaurant." The group walked to the side of the bridge that suppressed the water veins in the capital. They walked along the river and asked for directions from a few elderly citizens of the capital. The restaurant wasn't hidden deep, and the street outside the door was spacious. There were many luxurious carriages parked there. Just by looking at this, it didn't look like a restaurant that served mutton hot pot, but more like a brothel where people threw money away. Su Fengnian raised his head and looked. The 3 words on the signboard of Jojo Restaurant were written by this old man Song himself. The restaurant wasn't big and only had 1 floor. It probably only had a dozen seats. Su Fengnian hesitated whether or not to go in. Shenyuan Qingfeng, who was disgusted with mutton, actually walked in. Su Fengnian thought to himself, "What a wicked woman who wants the world to be in chaos. Does she want me to compete with the local officials and dignitaries in the capital so badly?" The 4 of them entered the Jojo embassy. Bluebird and Wu both looked like proper people, but Su Fengnian and Shenyuan Qingfeng were very eye-catching. This was especially true for the purple-clothed Mount Huishan mountain chieftain. Even Su Xiao said that she did indeed have a bit of the charm of a genuine imperial concubine in the palace. The moment she entered, although she merely looked around, everyone could clearly sense her arrogance. Shenyuan Qingfeng set his sights on an empty table in the corner. Ignoring the ivory bone fan on the table, he walked over and sat down. With a wave of his sleeve, he swept that elegant fan, which was worth quite a lot of gold and silver, to the ground. Wu wanted to let Bluebird sit with the young master on the bench, so he wanted to sit next to Shenyuan Qingfeng. However, after being coldly glanced at from the corner of his eyes, he could only obediently sit across from Shenyuan Qingfeng. Back then, when he and Bluebird encircled and suppressed Han Diaoxi together, this fearless young death warrior had suffered quite a lot. Su Fengnian originally wanted to squeeze with Wu and Bluebird on the same bench, but Bluebird purposely didn't leave a seat for him with a smirk. Su Fengnian could only brace himself and let Shenyuan Qingfeng sit closer to the wall. With her bad temper that was spoiled by Shenyuan Jingqing, she could only show some restraint and reverence towards Su Xiao. Towards Su Fengnian, she had never treated him nicely. His words went in one ear and out the other, so she remained seated in the middle of the bench, not moving an inch. Su Fengnian sat down sideways. The small restaurant was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, and there were no ordinary people coming in and out. There was an old man in his 60s who had the air of an official, as if his master had brought some hard-pressed students to improve the food. There were also young men who practically had the words Imperial Relatives written on a piece of paper and pasted on their foreheads. The women around them were of various sizes, and their accessories were all very presentable. If any of the accessories on the beauties were pawned, a small family wouldn't have to worry about having a good meal for a few years. There were also some strong men with a strong aura of Jianghu who called out to their friends. Shenyuan Qingfeng was being unreasonable, so Su Fengnian had no choice but to mend the pen for her. Before the waiter of the Jojo restaurant got angry, he picked up the ivory fan and found that there was a hollow ivory ball with balls hidden inside the ball. Su Fengnian shook it lightly and squinted his eyes to look at it. There were actually as many as 19 balls inside the ball. This kind of thought and craftsmanship could be said to be top-notch. Even though Su Fengnian was experienced and knowledgeable, he couldn't help but take a closer look.
The waiter in the restaurant was a young lad who was full of youthful vigor and vigor.
In addition, the Jiu restaurant had seen many big shots in the capital, so it was inevitable that he had high standards. Although the man and woman in front of him didn't seem like common people, he couldn't lose his prestige in his own territory. Therefore, there was a bit of anger in his words. I say, what's going on with you guys? Don't you know about first come, first served? I don't care who you are, but if you want to eat our restaurant's instant boiled mutton, you have to wait outside obediently.
As the waiter of the restaurant spoke, he glanced at the purple-clothed woman from time to time.
The reason why he spoke so loudly was nothing more than a petty scheme to attract her attention. Shenyuan Qingfeng turned her head and stretched out 2 fingers to point at the waiter's eyes. Su Fengnian calmly pressed down her hand and smiled apologetically at the waiter. We were in the wrong for taking the seat later on. When the owner of the fan arrives, I will naturally let them know. If they are unwilling to bend the rules, then we will go outside and wait obediently. The weather is cold right now, so just treat it as us borrowing your precious place to warm our bodies. My little sister has a bad temper, so don't lower yourself to her level.
The young lad Wu turned his head and held back his laughter with difficulty.
His young master really didn't suffer any losses no matter where he went. Didn't he just become the older brother of the female owner of Big Bull Gang? Chapter 742.
Scram to the side.
Shenyuan Qingfeng lightly lifted her foot from under the table. Her gaze was like a knife cutting at the son of a Jingdo family who was flaunting their family background. When she opened her mouth, she scared all the diners. The powerful guests of the Jianghu were especially impressed. They thought that this little girl whose cultivation they couldn't see through was definitely a dragon among men. The Jianghu had lowered its head to the court for many years. To dare to coldly oppose the son of a minister in Great Peace City, she was most likely not a pure person of the Jianghu. Was she also a descendant of a powerful official? When Wang Xionggui's most useless son heard this, he laughed loudly and straightened his back. He spun the ivory-embroidered ball in his hand and smiled. He wasn't angry at all. As long as a woman was beautiful, even if she was a bit fierce and arrogant, she would have her own style. He, Wang Yuanran, was merciless when dealing with the sons of aristocratic families whose families were a level lower than his. He knew which people of the same age in Jingdo he should not provoke, who he should greet with a smile, and who he should pretend to be a grandson. There were millions of people in Great Peace City, but on the surface, there were only a few thousand people.
Throwing away the old man who had retired and his father, who was a pillar of the court who was on par with him, the remaining 100 or so sons of aristocratic families could make him feel fear. Most of them were very familiar with him, and he really didn't recognize the young man and woman in front of him. He smiled confidently and calmly. He glanced at the purple-clothed woman's chest. She had hidden it deeply. He then looked down at the man who was groveling and tying her skirt. Brother and sister? Are you trying to fool me? Wang Yuanran sneered in his heart. Do you think that just because you're old, you're the Bailiang heir who doesn't kneel when he goes to court with a sword? Su Fengnian smiled and said, All right, the deal is done. The eyes in exchange for the embroidered ball. No matter how you look at it, Minister Wang's son, you've profited. If you don't leave now, I can't guarantee that you won't walk out horizontally. Wang Xiongui became an official during the reign of Yong Hui and impeached Su Xiao 12 times. Every debt has its debtor. I'm not like some people in Jingdo who won't settle this old debt with a son like you. You're not worthy. No matter how hot the mutton pot was in Jiu restaurant, after these words entered the ears, it became exceptionally cold outside the restaurant. That morning, the old man was a 5th-rank official in the Ministry of Personnel. His position was at the back and he did not get the chance to witness the arrogance of the Crown Prince of Northern Liang. Later on, when the Crown Prince of Northern Liang confronted tens of thousands of people from the Imperial College alone, the old man went to the memorial arch to join in the fun. From afar, he saw the bad behavior of the young man in white robes. Together with his colleagues, he lamented that the Northern Liang was indeed full of evil people. He was only 20 years old and had yet to inherit the position of Crown Prince of Northern Liang, yet he was already so rebellious. When he became the Crown Prince of Northern Liang in the future, could they really count on such a boastful brat to guard the northwest gate of the imperial court, which was an important border area? Wang Yuanran was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. He raised his finger and laughed angrily. Brat, do you really think you are the Northern Liang prince?
Even if you are, do you dare to bite me? Su Fengnian stretched out his arm, his 5 fingers forming a hook, and pulled Wang Yuanran towards the table. Su Fengnian pressed the back of Wang Yuanran's head and slammed it against the table, creating a hole in the head of the minister's youngest son. Wang Yuanran fell straight to the ground and fainted. Those henchmen were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear, their legs trembling.
As the son of a famous family in the capital, under the premise that victory was in their grasp, it was okay to step on them a few times and slap them a few times, but if they really rolled up their sleeves and fought, it would be too degrading.
What they did was honorable, but after the other people knelt down and begged for mercy, they spat their saliva into bowls and plates for them to drink. There were also ruthless people who peed on others, but they were all the descendants of their fathers. This brother in front of them couldn't be the Baoyang barbarian, could he? Su Fengnian curled his lips at the young man. Throw them all out. The young man of sacrifice suddenly stood up, grabbed one of them like a chicken and threw him out of the door. But before the first wave subsided, another wave arose. He was thrown back into the restaurant by Wang Yuanran's henchmen. He bumped into his friends and fell to the ground. He was probably so scared that he forgot to cry for his father and mother. Su Fengnian turned his head and narrowed his eyes. One of the real masters of the capital had arrived. The Zhao family already had the world, so naturally, they also had the capital. Among the 5 or 6 people who stepped into the restaurant, 2 of them had the surname Zhao. Princess Sui Zhu, Zhao Fengya, a tall and strong man, stepped into the Jojo restaurant before her. He was the first prince, Zhao Wu, who had been regarded as the next emperor of the Zhao family for many years. Zhao Fengya was gloating, while Zhao Wu's face was gloomy. Among the 3 people behind him, one of them was a woman who was far more beautiful than 91. There were also 2 retainers from the inner palace. They walked steadily and wore golden sabers with yellow silk around their waists. A certain doctor from the Ministry of Personnel, who had already been blinded once, was shocked. This time, he didn't dare to be blinded. He was about to kneel to welcome the prince and princess when Zhao Wu, who was known for his heroic spirit and the spirit of the late emperor, frowned and waved his hand to stop the old man from making a big fuss. The doctor from the Ministry of Personnel hurriedly left the restaurant with his favorite student. Jianghu people didn't dare to stay in a place of trouble for long. They put down the silver and ran away without caring about the change. Wang Yuanran fainted, and the henchmen suffered a great deal. The ugly man looked in the mirror and scared himself. He didn't dare to make a sound and just knelt there to beg for forgiveness. Zhao Wu picked a stool and sat down. He didn't look at Su Fengnian and sneered, "Wild dogs have no manners. They pee everywhere and don't look at where they are." Chapter 743. Su Fengnian turned around and gestured to the waiter to place the dishes on the table. Then he laughed softly and said, "The dog is at the door, but it barks eagerly. It barks a few times when it sees people. Isn't it afraid of being knocked down by a brick? It's winter in the capital, and it's really nice to eat a meal of local dog meat." Princess Sui Zhu lowered her head. She looked like a lady from a noble family and was unparalleled in elegance, but in reality, her face was full of smiles. She covered her stomach with one hand. Her stomach was hurting from laughing so hard. The woman who had been described in the New Rouge reviews as having a beauty that made all the women in the world avoid, quietly frowned when she heard the 2 men's vulgar and mean words. The 2 retainers with golden swords were naturally comparable to ordinary servants from noble families. They held their breath and stood with their hands on their swords. They just quietly guarded the door of the restaurant and turned a deaf ear to the quarrel in the small restaurant. The great Prince Xiaoyi said calmly, "You're only worthy of being bitten by a watchdog like Wang Yuanran. How promising." The waiter of the Jojo restaurant didn't dare to show his face. The owner of the restaurant was a middle-aged woman. It was unknown which family raised a canary, but she wasn't afraid in the face of such a storm. She walked out with a charming smile and placed the copper pot on the table with both hands. Then she deftly brought 3 plates of fresh and tender mutton slices with marbled patterns, sesame seed cakes, pickled cabbage, white skin sugar, garlic, and other exquisite snacks. In addition, there were 7 or 8 bowls and plates with smoked vinegar from Xianxia, dried soy sauce, freshly fried chili, chives, flowers, and so on. Red, green, yellow, blue, and white, plate after plate, bowl after bowl, refreshing and refreshing. Just looking at it made one's appetite soar. She told Zhao Yi's table to wait for a moment, and then she went to the curtained door and stood at the door, swaying gracefully. She made it clear that she wasn't going to miss the fierce battle between the local dragon and the river python.
Not to mention small fish and shrimp, even large fish that weighed a few hundred catties would have to obediently be steamed and braised in the pot if they thought they could overturn the river and sea.
Xianxia said, "You guys go out first." Those helpers felt as if they had been pardoned and were moved to tears, but they still didn't dare to move. They were afraid that this fairy would go back on her word and add to their crimes. If that happened, their parents would peel their skin and pull out their tendons when they returned home. Prince Xiao Wu waved his hand with a straight face. The helpers ran away quickly and left Wang Yuan ran on the cold ground without looking back. The words, sharing weal and woe together, were not something that could be exchanged with a few words or a bowl of chicken blood. Zhao Yi's words were earth-shattering. "I heard that you personally intercepted and killed Zhao Kai at the Iron Gate Pass. Although I don't like this brother of unknown origin, his surname is Zhao after all."
Hearing this, the lady boss, who was even more charming than a young woman, sighed and went back into the room, pulling down the curtain.
This was no longer a secret that she could hear. Even if her backer was very big, so big that it was beyond the imagination of rich children like Wang Yuanran, who in the world didn't live under the Zhao family's roof. If you didn't see the big picture, you wouldn't be able to survive in the capital. However, this was the first time that she had seen the first prince, who had been secretly sent to the border to gain experience since childhood. In the past, she had often heard that every time he broke through the enemy lines, he would always take the lead.
If it weren't for his status as a prince, he would have accumulated enough military merits to be a commander of 3,000 soldiers.
His speech and behavior were heroic and heroic. This time seeing was believing.
He was a straightforward man.
Su Fengnian turned around. "You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want." Zhao Wu laughed. "Surnamed Su, you dare to do it but don't dare to admit it?" Su Fengnian also laughed. "I can't say for other things, but beating a dog, I dare to do it and dare to admit it." Zhao Wu nodded. "If a wild dog can pee on my feet, it can be considered a skill. I'm just afraid that its mouth will be full of feces and it won't bite." Su Fengnian slowly stood up. Zhao Wu clicked his tongue. "Just you? Don't you want to call others to do it for you? When the time comes, don't give yourself a way out by saying that you didn't eat and your hands and feet are weak." A golden saber imperial bodyguard took 3 steps forward and unsheathed his saber by a few inches. Su Fengnian continued to move forward.
The imperial bodyguard took a step forward and quickly unsheathed his saber.
The saber flashed. But in the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian was standing in front of him. With one hand on the hilt, he put the saber back into the scabbard. The imperial bodyguard, whose strength was close to second rank, had a cold look in his eyes. He raised his knee and knocked. Su Fengnian's left hand let go of the saber's hilt and gently pushed. The imperial bodyguard's knee missed. In his shock, Su Fengnian smashed out with a spinning kick. The imperial bodyguard couldn't care less about the fact that he couldn't take advantage of Su Fengnian and hastily pulled out his saber. His body fell backward and he slapped the ground with one hand. Just as he was about to stand up, Su Fengnian took advantage of the situation and slammed his palm on the top of his head. The imperial bodyguard was directly smashed into the ground. He spat out blood and struggled to stand up. Without the false mysterious finger's internal energy and the false celestial phenomenon, Su Fengnian had already witnessed the magnificence of the long scroll. Even if it was just a pitifully rare treasure, it was still far from what an imperial bodyguard who wasn't even second rank could challenge. Another golden saber imperial bodyguard leaped over his colleague's body and raised his saber to chop down on his head. During the fierce battle with the blind zither player in the rainy alley, there was once the 18 strokes of the Wuxia. Su Fengnian leaned sideways and slapped the saber 6 times in a row. The saber's momentum was completely gone. He waved his sleeve and threw the imperial bodyguard to the wall. Then, he rode his sword and nailed Huang Tong and Qing Mei to the wall. The remaining 10 swords pierced through in an instant. After the imperial bodyguard fell on the table, there were 12 shocking pools of blood on the wall. Su Fengnian turned around and grabbed the first Prince Zhao Wu's neck. He lowered his head and laughed sinisterly. "Zhao Wu, other than your surname, what do you have to compete with me?" Su Fengnian pushed back and knocked Chen Yu to the ground. This crown prince of Bailiang actually pinned the first prince of Liang to the wall and made him unable to breathe. Su Fengnian asked word by word, "So what if your surname is Zhao?" Chapter 744. Su Fengnian. A woman at the door called out softly. Her appearance was average, but she was imposing without being angry. Beside her stood a young man who looked somewhat similar to the first prince Zhao Wu. However, compared to Zhao Wu's boorish aura, this young man had a more reserved and refined aura. At first glance, one could tell that he was an expert in jade cultivation. After being humiliated, the boorish man Zhao Wu, who should have been angry out of humiliation, gave a fleeting smile. Only Su Fengnian was sharp enough to notice it. Perhaps even the woman, who was focused on the crown prince of Bailiang, did not notice it. Su Fengnian had wanted to fish out Han Diaoxi, who was hiding his head and tail, but he did not expect that it was Empress Zhao Ji and the fourth prince Zhao Zhuan who surfaced. He smiled and slowly let go of Zhao Wu's neck. He turned around and bowed slightly. His tone was respectful, but his address was extremely disrespectful. Nephew greets Aunt Zhao. Zhao Ji's expression was complicated. The guilt that she had suppressed deep in her heart floated to the surface. She said coldly, "This is the first time you have addressed me like this, and it will also be the last time. Take care of yourself." The previous generation of the Su family and the Zhao family had already cut off all ties. Zhao Ji, who originally still had a trace of sympathy for the Su family, had completely extinguished the flickering incense. She suddenly turned around and saw the gloomy white-haired man smiling like a spring breeze. This made Zhao Ji's heart fill with an unknown haze. She was not afraid that this young man would become the second Su Xiao. Su Xiao's rise to power was due to the spring and autumn period and the 6 kingdoms under his horse's hooves. It would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for his descendants to rely on military exploits. Zhao Ji was not afraid that he would follow the woman's upright character. She was only afraid that he would not care about anything and would bite people like a crazy wild dog. Zhao Zhuan helped 2 golden-sabred imperial bodyguards up. The fourth prince Zhao Zhuan walked forward and helped one of them who was less injured. The imperial bodyguard was immediately filled with gratitude. The 2 princes, who shared the same father and mother, quietly looked at each other and smiled. Zhao Wu even turned his head and grinned. He made a bloody gesture of cutting his neck with a knife at the crown prince of Bailiang. Zhao Zhuan gently pressed down Zhao Wu's hand and smiled apologetically at Su Fengnian. Princess Suizhu and Zhao Fengya lowered their heads. Her expression could not be seen clearly. Chen Yu, who had fallen, was still calm and collected. She was also very calm. The 3 women sat in the carriage. The first prince Zhao Wu and the fourth prince Zhao Zhuan rode their horses to escort them. Such a caravan was truly shocking. Princess Suizhu's eyes were full of smiles, but she scolded, "What a boorish man!" Zhao Ji shook her head and said, "The ladder was put up by your fourth brother. Su Fengnian is also smart." As a result, both families walked down the ladder. Zhao Fengya was confused and said, "I don't understand." Zhao Ji lifted the curtain and glared at her son, Zhao Zhuan, who thought he was smart. The latter smiled mischievously and made a face. Zhao Ji said calmly, "Su Fengnian used this opportunity to tell our Zhao family that the Su family will only guard the country for the people of Liang in the future. It has nothing to do with the Zhao family." Zhao Fengya said angrily, "He's too bold." Zhao Fengya was still angry. She snorted and then laughed to herself, almost crying. "Mother, if only I had Li Chuangong's ability. I would learn from the old god of swords and go to Bailiang and shout, 'Money, come, horse, come,' and knife a few times. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Su Fengnian's family wealth is all gone. Or I could learn from the white-robed monk and hang a yellow river over his head and drown him with a splash." Zhao Ji touched her daughter's head lovingly. "Childish. You're still young." Zhao Fengya asked curiously, "Who's the proprietress? The last time I came here to eat mutton with Uncle Su, we also talked and laughed." Zhao Ji's face was covered with a faint layer of melancholy. She shook her head and said, "An old account book that can't be calculated clearly." Zhao Fengya threw herself into the arms of the current empress and laughed in a low voice. "Mother, tell me everything. You're only a few years younger than Uncle Su. Did you have a crush on Uncle Su back then?" Zhao Ji was stunned. She twisted her daughter's ear and said, "Lawless. I should marry you off as soon as possible." Chen Yu, who was clearly estranged from the mother and daughter pair, didn't say a word. She didn't ask, didn't listen, and didn't speak. Some places were at daggers drawn. Some places were happy and harmonious. Longhu and Wudong had been fighting for the ancestral court of Taoism for hundreds of years. Perhaps many people had forgotten that 120 years ago, there was a young Taoist priest who looked like a wild fox that drew a talisman dragon in Tai City. It was rumored that after adding the finishing touch, he would fly into the clouds. This rootless duckweed summoned wind and thunder, overthrew ghosts, and suppressed Longhu and Wudong with his own strength. He was highly regarded by the Emperor of Liang at that time and was conferred the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Fu Hua. He was in charge of the talismans of the Three Mountains and was in charge of the affairs of Taoism. He prayed for snow and rain, and all of them came true. In the hands of the late Emperor of Liang, he was given the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Ming Cheng. After the current emperor ascended to the throne, he was given the title of Great Spiritual Master Taishen Ming Cheng. However, after 60 years, the place where this immortal who had the same surname as the emperor cultivated declined day by day. There was not a single incense stick in the incense burner. There were green pines and cypresses, which were especially green in the winter. However, there was no immortal aura. Instead, it seemed gloomy. There was a small table under an old cypress tree. 2 people were drinking with 5 maidservants standing behind them. One was a plump maidservant warming the wine, while the other was a thin maidservant brewing tea. The wine pot and teapot were placed on the table with a clear distinction. The person drinking had a withered and solemn face. He looked to be about 40 years old. Probably because of his poor complexion, the twilight was gloomy. Tea drinkers were much more elegant and elegant. Even in the capital where good and bad mixed together, it was rare to see such an outstanding man with such an extraordinary temperament at first glance. He was even more meticulous than a woman in taking care of himself. 67 Yuan Benshi. 64 Nalan Yusi. Everyone knew that Nalan Yusi had 5 personal maidservants. In Fengdu, there were 3 corpses in Dongyue and Shishu. Their nickname was derived from their aura. The maidservants who brewed tea were the 3 corpses, and the maidservants who warmed wine were the 3 corpses. Nalan Yusi laid on the sandalwood couch and scooped some spices. He smiled and asked, Yuan Benshi, are you really going to cultivate Jean Lanting, that white-eyed wolf, as the second blue-eyed boy? Be careful not to lose everything. Although I haven't heard or seen it with my own eyes, I heard from other people that he doesn't seem like a talent that you can entrust with such a big task. He's too full to be a minister. He's poor to the bone. Yan Qing is not a good thing. If you let him assist you in governing the country, aren't you afraid that you'll lose everything after working hard for a lifetime? Yuan Benshi said vaguely, I'll take care of the matters in the capital. You don't have to worry about it. Nalan Yusi took over a black glazed teacup. He swirled the cup with his finger and smelled the refreshing fragrance. It was as if the fragrance of the tea could intoxicate people. He squinted his eyes and said, I think Lu Su, the strategist under King of Jing and Zhao Sun, is not bad. Don't you want to poach him? Without the young blind man's assistance, won't Xiangfan, which controls the waste of the Central Plains, be in your hands? Lu Su can also take over the mantle of your traversing technique. Yuan Benshi was expressionless as he drank slowly. Nalan Yusi slapped his forehead. It was not only self-deprecating but also laughing at others. He raised his eyes and looked at the courtyard. I almost forgot. You, Yuan Benshi, have no children. You're no different from a eunuch. Moreover, you don't make enemies or friends. This is to let the Zhao family rest assured. If you have an heir, it will be the day when you, Yuan Benshi, will be killed. In this case you should really envy me. Yuan Benshi glanced at the man standing behind the king of Yanqi. Nalan Yusi laughed. Is Lu Su really a chess piece of Huang Longshi? Is Chen Yu, who has a noble and honorable life? Yuan Benshi raised his head and drank a cup of wine. Chapter 745. Nalan Yusi knew this person's temperament, so he was too lazy to get to the bottom of it. He changed the question, You didn't catch Huang Longshi in your courtyard? Yuan Benshi shook his head. Nalan Yusi was a little cold. He raised his hand, and the servant girl Fengdu bent down, gently held her master's white jade-like hand, and put it between her warm breasts. Nalan Yusi lazily said, It's funny when I think about it. You, Yuan Benshi, single-handedly planned the white clothes case in the capital and persuaded Zhao Zhizhao to be the prince consort. You just want Bailiang to die. Now, Bailiang's heir finally came to the capital, but he can't be killed in the capital. He has to be protected like his own son. Even Han Diaoxi doesn't allow him to enter the capital to make trouble. He can only kill him 500 miles away from the capital. Yuan Benshi cut off half an inch of his tongue in the past, so he couldn't speak clearly. Su Fengnian defeated Chen Jibao, so I lost to Bailiang. Just take it as a toast to Li Yishan. Nalan Yusi smiled sincerely. You are better than me in this aspect. You admit defeat. I don't have this kind of tolerance. Otherwise, I can still be friends with Xie. After he died, don't talk about toasting, I can't wait to dig his grave. I heard that he still has descendants who don't follow his surname. I dug 3 feet into the ground to look for them for many years, but there was no news. Thanks to the Rouge Review, I know that his name is Nangong Push. Yuan Benshi raised his arm and stopped drinking. He was in a trance and didn't pay attention to this. Nalan Yusi chuckled softly. According to the law of the feudal lord, he needs to observe filial piety for 3 years. I guess before Su Shao died, he will provoke the border and fight a war with Bei Mang, so that his eldest son can be crowned as the king smoothly. Yuan Benshi, I advise you to make your move as soon as possible and take drastic measures to disrupt Li Yishan's plans before his death. Yuan Benshi concluded, Do you know why you can't compare to Li Yishan? Nalan Yusi said calmly, I know. Huang Longsure scolded me for only being able to gain and lose for 10 years. You are half mute, and I am half blind. Yuan Benshi laughed it off. Nalan Yusi frowned his willowy eyebrows that were like a gentle woman's. That kid really went to Beimang alone and killed Su Huainan and the 5th raccoon, who was at the peak of his martial strength? Yuan Benshi nodded. Nalan Yusi clicked his tongue and said, Then aren't you afraid? Yuan Benshi shook his head and said, Unless he can destroy Beimang, he won't be able to use the Zhao family to kill me. Nalan Yusi smiled and said, If that's the case, it's a profit for you to exchange your life for a Bailiang or a Beimang. Then, Chen Jibao, aren't you worried about raising a tiger? It's no longer the spring and autumn period. A boorish man can't accomplish anything. The world is not in chaos, Shu is in chaos, the world has been pacified, but Shu is not pacified. Occupying Shu is the same as sitting on Bailiang. There is no hope of annexing the world. Yuan Benshi, I have to remind you that this is the experience of my generation of scholars. In the spring and autumn period, who would have thought that a young general with the strength of grade 2 could become a butcher? It's not the same. Nalan Yusi sighed, looked at the sky, and murmured, Love can kill, not only men and women infatuated. It is said that Li Mixi of Beimang has a cage with butterflies. We are all butterflies in the cage. Only Huang Longsure is detached from the world. Yuan Benshi, have you ever thought about what he wants? Yuan Benshi stood up. The 3 immortals in life are to establish words, merit, and virtue. 3 great traditions in one life, loyalty, literature, and quality. I'm afraid that it will take hundreds or even thousands of years to conclude Huang Longshure's coffin. Nalan Yusi did not respectfully send Yuan Benshi off, but sat on the small couch. It's best if Huang Longshure dies in our hands, then I die in the hands of Xie family's son, and you die in the hands of Su Fengnian, then the world will be peaceful. Yuan Benshi suddenly turned around and laughed. Isn't it more interesting to die in the hands of Su Fengnian? Nalan Yusi laughed and scolded. Bad luck. When Yuan Benshi walked out of the abandoned Taoist temple, Nalan Yusi thought for a moment, dipped his finger in the tea, and wrote 2 words on the table. Emperor. Sitting back at the table, Shen Yuan Qingfeng sneered. Who told you to act on impulse? Were you framed by first Prince Zhao Zhuan, or tricked by 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan? Su Fengnian said calmly, It's most likely the 4th Prince of Zhao family. Although Zhao Wu deliberately hid his skills, he shouldn't be so scheming. I heard that the Crown Prince is one of them. Then you're destined to offend the future Emperor of Liang? That's right. Oh, even the Empress is really angry, but you don't look worried at all. Are you faking it? I said I'm faking it, okay? That woman is Chen Yu on the Rouge ranking, right? Is she going to be the first prince's wife, or the new empress in the palace? Not interested to know. I see that your relationship with her is not simple. I'm just guessing. My intuition has always been very accurate. Su Fengnian boiled a few pieces of mutton in the pot, and put them into the bowls of Bluebird and Wu respectively. Shen Yuan Qingfeng was the most eccentric woman Su Fengnian had ever seen who could change so much after reaching the age of 20. She had the spoiled air of a romantic woman, the evil air of a broken family, and the righteous air of a woman with a great family. 81, 85 1, 91. Looking at Xianyuan Qingfeng, Su Fengnian often thought of the man who became a saint on the Great Snow Plains. Su Fengnian had always been biased against scholars. The poor scholar Chen Shiliang he met on his second trip was an exception, and Xianyuan Jingqing was even more so. Of course, Su Fengnian didn't have any superfluous thoughts about Xianyuan Qingfeng. It was just that he couldn't tell whether it was because of the honor and mutual benefit, or because they were both in the same predicament and had no way out. Towards the arrogant Xianyuan Qingfeng, he always had some tolerance that was beyond normal standards. Since the ancient times, the court and Jianghu were places where men fought for fame and fortune, and women were caught in the crossfire. Su Fengnian would always unknowingly pay more attention to those women who had wandered but were still stubborn. This was the case for Miss Su at Tuma Pass, and also for Miss Qingzhu, a wine seller whose daughter had died early in Beimang. Su Fengnian seemed to have thought of something.
He smiled and shouted toward the room with the hanging curtain. "Aunt Hong."
"No one is an elder like you." The woman pretended to spit. "Bah, you little brat, you just called that woman Aunt Zhao. How can I be called Aunt? Be careful not to shorten my life. Come, let me take a closer look. TSK, you really do look like Wu Su. Luckily, you're not as crude as Su Xiao. Otherwise, which family's daughter would be blind to be your wife? I've been worried sick all these years. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to find a wife. Aunt Hong, this is the first time we meet, and you're already so sarcastic? I'm not paying back the money Su Xiao owes you for those meals. Call me Aunt if you want. I'm already so old anyway. I'm not afraid of being called old by you. What money? Auntie Hong is not your heartless Auntie Zhao. She is very protective of her children, just like an old hen. As long as they enter the house, she will peck at anyone she sees. She doesn't care about friendship at all. Back then, your mother, her, and I called each other sisters. She was the shrewdest and most calculating. What a pity. The little sisterhood we had back then was squandered away by the righteousness of 2 generations of men like you." The woman and Su Fengnian squeezed onto a bench. Xianyuan Qingfeng silently leaned against the wall and saw from the corner of his eye that the woman didn't forget to pinch Su Fengnian's cheeks as she spoke. It could be said that she loved him so much that she couldn't part with him. However, he couldn't stop her. Such an interesting scene was truly hard to come by in 100 years. The woman rubbed Su Fengnian's white hair and gently said, "I've wronged you all these years." Su Fengnian pursed his lips and shook his head. Chapter 746. This chapter is a bit short. It was the last Li Dong before Li Yang changed the name of the year. A snowfall signaled a bumper year. This winter, the wheat would be covered with 3 layers of blankets. Next year, they would be able to sleep on steamed buns. There was no morning court today. The emperor led an even grander group of civil and military officials to the northern suburbs to worship. Since they were not burdened by the morning court, the officials were all refreshed. The commoners who ran over to get some of the aura of the officials had their eyes opened. Some of the commoners who were distant relatives of the high-ranking officials in the procession were bragging proudly about how close they were. The neighbors who knew them well laughed but did not say anything. Some of the commoners who were several streets away were shocked when they heard this. 60% of the commoners were there for the new Minister of War, Chen Zhibao. The other 30% were curious about what kind of young man the heir of Bailiang was. The commoners were like this. Even if they had grown calluses from hearing His Royal Highness speak ill of him, they were still shocked when he did the magnificent feat of tearing apart 100 zhang of land. Even if the perfected ones in the Taoist temples in the capital said that it was not worth mentioning that he relied on an otherworldly item to do so, the commoners still thought too highly of the heir of Bailiang. If there were not 100,000 playboys in Tai and city who played with swords and sabers, there were at least 10,000 of them. Which one of them had this ability? It seemed that this white-haired young man from Bailiang was not someone to be bullied. While they were muttering, the commoners also had their own plans. In the future, if they followed the crowd and cursed Bailiang, should they show some mercy? If this fell into the ears of the heir of Prince Liang and his son, wouldn't they be in trouble? Chen Zhibao was dressed in a red embroidered robe. Unfortunately, he did not mention the plum wine. The emperor had purposely arranged for him to walk alone in the procession. The women of the capital, no matter if they were from a noble family or from a humble family, were all captivated by him. Nearby, the king of Yanqi, Zhao Yi, the king of Guangling, Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, Zhao Ying, the king of Huainan, and Zhao Sun, the king of Jing'an, were almost all taken away by Chen Zhibao. They were all princes wearing yellow python robes, and they deliberately distanced themselves from a white-haired prince wearing eye-catching white python robes. A young blind man came down to the roadside with the help of his maid Xinghua. He did not insist on squeezing into the crowd, but just stood quietly at the outer edge of the thick crowd of onlookers. When Su Fengnian rode past on the street, Xinghua reminded him softly. Blind Lu Su, who had rushed over from Xiangfan City, looked up with a solemn expression. They sat opposite each other in Yongzi Alley and played 10 rounds of chess from noon until dusk. It was an unforgettable experience. Xinghua carefully reached out to protect the scholar who the old king of Jing'an wanted her to protect with her life. The old king only wanted him to live, so she did not hope that one day the new king would want him to die. At the very least, she did not want him to die in the hands of Xinghua. There was a tacit understanding between Xinghua and him, so they talked without restraint. She asked softly, "Young master, do you know the heir of Bailiang?" Lu Su did not hide it. He smiled and said, "I'm blind, so I can't say that I've met him once. When I was gambling chess in Yongzi Alley, I earned a lot of copper coins from heir Su. 10 rounds of chess, I earned a total of 110 copper coins." Xinghua smiled and said, "He also knows how to play chess? Didn't he lose his helmet and armor to you?" Lu Su shook his head and said, "His chess skills are quite good. He has a lot of unreasonable moves, so it was not easy for me to win." The master and servant stayed for a while and were about to leave. Xinghua suddenly turned around and stared at an old scholar who was coming from afar. She was not afraid of a scholar who could not tell his real age, but the hidden qi made Xinghua, a death warrior, feel as if she was facing a great enemy and rushed over. Lu Su patted her arm, bowed and asked, "Are you Mr. Yuan?" The man smiled vaguely and said, "The editor of Hanlin Academy, Xiao Yuan Pu." Lu Suan stood still and looked calm. There was no surprise, or fear. Yuan Pu, or Yuan Benshi, walked a few steps closer and ignored Xinghua, who was like a tigress. He continued to speak with his vague but authentic Beijing accent. "Young Master Lu, you've spun a cocoon around yourself. It's a waste of your talent." Lu Su shook his head and said, "The new temple has a new climate. No matter how small the temple is, the number of pilgrims will not be too small. No matter how big the old temple is, it will leak in the rain and leak in the wind. Even if you were my abbot, you wouldn't want to go there. Besides, no matter how many pilgrims there are in the old temple, there will be a lot of disputes. I don't even know when I will be kicked out of the temple. Besides, Lu Suan is blind and doesn't know people, but he knows his own weight. He doesn't want to be the next Song family." Yuan Benshi seemed to be amused. Even Nailan Yusi, who was as smart as Lu Su, was not in the mood to talk. He said, "Young Master Lu, don't forget why this old man of the Song family died and why the old temple of the Song family collapsed." Lu Su said calmly, "Ordinary rich families harm their descendants with their wealth. The Song family killed the future generation with their scholarship and deserve to die. Besides, Mr. Yuan, don't forget who borrowed my knife to support the young phoenix of the Song family." Yuan Benshi smiled and then sighed. "I have chosen more than 10 prime ministers, and Song Kelly is the least eye-catching. I'm afraid that even Nailan Yusi would have to leave the capital to think of this plan." Lu Su shook his head again and said, "Mr. Nailan's plan is not in the capital or even in the imperial court. You and Mr. Yuan go our separate ways. Naturally, you won't spend too much time thinking about these things. It's inevitable that you will miss something." Yuan Benshi was lost in thought. Yuan Benshi asked slowly, "You are indebted to the Prince of Bailiang for recommending you. What will you do?" Lu Su asked back, "Isn't it the bottom line of a counselor to plan for his position and politics?" Yuan Benshi smiled and said, "I don't believe in such high-sounding words at all when others say it. But since it's you, Lu Su, I'm 70 to 80% convinced." Xinghua was just a man of sacrifice who lived in a corner of Xiangfan. Even if he was talented, he could never imagine that the old Confucian scholar who talked with Child Lu was the chief counselor of the Liang dynasty who was above tens of thousands of people and not below one person. However, no matter how ignorant and inexperienced Xinghua was, he still knew how powerful Nailan Yusi was. Not to mention the rumors about Nailan and the king of Yen having a habit of cutting their sleeves, Nailan himself was a well-deserved top strategist. Right now, Xinghua was having a headache over how to explain what she had seen and heard today to Prince Jingon, Zhao Sun. How could she not be overly personal and yet not cause the new Prince Jingon to suspect young Master Lu? Yuan Benshi asked, "Why didn't you go to Bailiang?" Lu Su smiled and said, "I wanted to go, but Su Fengnian didn't take me out of Yongzi Alley." Yuan Benshi laughed and turned to Xinghua. He directly told Xinghua his real name that even Lu Su didn't know. "Lu Lingbao, I talked with Lu Su just now. You can report it to Zhao Sun as it is. If you want to live a few more years with your young master, don't mention it again." Xinghua's face turned pale. Yuan Benshi said, "Goodbye." Lu Su hesitated and said to Xinghua, "Thank you, Mr. Yuan, for giving me a 10-year life-saving charm." Xinghua was confused, but he still followed the example of a girl from an ordinary family and curtsied. Yuan Benshi waved his hand and turned to leave. Xinghua's lips trembled and asked softly, "Young master life-saving charm? What do you mean?" Lu Su said frankly, "Our king of Jing is suspicious by nature. Before he becomes famous, he can bear it. Once he becomes powerful, he will inevitably get carried away and settle old scores with others. Mr. Yuan, no matter how powerful he is, he doesn't dare to provoke you. This gentleman met me today to give me a life-saving charm. Giving it to me is naturally giving it to you." Xinghua said with a sad face, "This sentence will also rot in my stomach. Young master, please don't worry." Lu Su suddenly rubbed Xinghua's hair and smiled softly. "Lu Lingbao, this name is blessed." Xinghua suddenly smiled brightly. "Thank you for your auspicious words." Lu Su turned his head and looked and said to himself, "Bailiang." Chapter 747. The second of the three central halls was the Zhanghe Hall.
When the crown prince was announced, the emperor needed to go to this hall to put on his imperial robe and crown before taking his seat.
The emperor looked at Empress Zhao Ji, who was not far away from him. He smiled gently at her without saying anything. Originally, the empress and the emperor had the same surname, which was not appropriate. However, when the emperor was still a prince who was not valued, he treated the woman who led the harem with respect and treated her as a confidant. He swore in private that when he ascended the throne, he would make her son the crown prince. Zhao Ji favored her youngest son, Zhao Zhuan, and the emperor did not hesitate to violate the ancestral rule of choosing the eldest and not the youngest. It could be seen how important the Empress Zhao Ji was in the emperor's heart. For the first time, no one questioned such a decision. It was obvious that the Zhao family's control of the country had reached an unprecedented level. The concubines who had given birth to princes also looked normal and did not dare to show the slightest emotion. Among the 6 princes, only the youngest, the 6th prince, Zhao Chun, was 12 years old and could stay in the capital until he turned 20. The other 4 princes, who had no hope of becoming the crown prince, were crowned as kings today. 3 days later, they would have to leave the capital and go to the vassal state. Before leaving the vassal state, they had to bid farewell to the new crown prince and kowtow 3 times. The 6 princes in Wuying Hall were divided into 2 groups. The first prince, the 4th prince, and the 6th prince gathered on one side. Zhao Wu was about to be conferred the title of Liao King and was given the title of Zhenbei General. He had the sole military power among the princes. The second prince, Zhao Wen, was conferred the title of Tang King. His mother was Nie Yuanjin, the pure concubine of Jiangnan. She was not a woman from a wealthy family. She scrupulously abided by etiquette in the harem and stood aloof from worldly affairs. She had an extremely strict and gentle temperament. The prince, Zhao Wen, was also rather gentle, respectful, and thrifty. His eloquence was magnificent, and he was praised as having a deity in his pen and inkstone. He often discussed the Tao with Prime Minister Zhao Danping, living up to the word literary. The third prince Zhao Xiong was conferred the title of King of Han and would soon rule at the border of Jizhou. The virtuous concubine Peng Yuanqing, one of the leaders of the Northern Crown Prince group, was the daughter of the Peng family of Liaodong. Zhao Xiong was also the prince who made the royal family worry the most. It was rumored that he had made things difficult for the prince Zhao Kai many times. The 5th prince Zhao Hong was conferred the title of King of Yu. His mother was not a concubine, Xue Xiaoyu. Among the concubines, Yan Dongwu's hand was held by the 4th prince, Zhao Zhuan. Her hand was as cold as frost, and her beautiful face was somewhat restrained. Zhao Zhuan, who had a gentle smile, had sweaty palms. When he chatted with his brother Zhao Wu in a low voice, he kept turning his head and smiling at her. She didn't know why, but when she went to the capital to marry the royal family for the first time, she felt at ease about marrying the fourth prince who was not favored by the world. The couple's days were like glue. But when she realized that everything was not as straightforward and casual as she imagined, Yan Dongwu felt more and more like walking on thin ice. Especially when she went out of the palace to visit relatives half a year ago, she saw her father's old face that could not hide the excitement no matter how hard he tried. She saw her father crying with joy, but he didn't say anything. Yan Dongwu began to realize that everything was going out of control. After returning to the palace, she became more and more silent and cautious with her words and actions. Every time she went to greet the Empress mother-in-law with her husband, it was like a war without smoke. This made Yan Dongwu very confused. The only thing she wasn't secretly happy about was that she was going to be the crown princess. Empress Zhao Ji, who was recognized as invincible in the palace, saw this and felt more gratified. However, Zhao Ji would not tell this praise to her daughter-in-law. Zhao Ji came to her two sons and tidied their collars and sleeves meticulously. The first prince Zhao Zhuan grinned. Zhao Zhuan, who was about to be announced to the world as the crown prince, was still frivolous and shameless. He held his mother's hand and rubbed it on his face. Seeing this, the young sixth prince felt that his fourth brother was even more childish than him and smiled. Zhao Ji pulled back her hand and knocked on Zhao Zhuan's forehead. She pretended to be angry and said, "How old are you? How can you be so shameless?" Zhao Wu put his arm around his younger brother's shoulder and said, "No matter how old you are, you will always be mother's son." Zhao Zhuan said softly, "Mother, why don't we let big brother leave the capital later?" Zhao Ji glared angrily and said, "Nonsense." The thick-skinned Zhao Zhuan was not afraid. He stuck out his tongue and ruffled the young Zhao Chun's hair. "Fortunately, I have Xiao Chuner to play with me in the capital." The young imperial prince pulled on Zhao Zhuan's sleeve and said expectantly, fourth brother, when will you give that ever-victorious general to me?" Yan Dongwu pinched the fourth prince, who had promised to stop fighting crickets, and said gently to Zhao Chun, "Xiao Chun, I'll give them all to you later. If your fourth brother dares to keep one for himself, you can tell me." The young prince squeezed out a bright smile at his fourth brother, who had a bitter look on his face. Then, he pretended to bow to the crown princess. "Chun, thanks sister-in-law for your great kindness." Zhao Ji's eyes were smiling. For some reason, His Majesty the Emperor had already put on his yellow dragon robe and came to their side. When he saw the warm scene of everyone talking to each other from the bottom of their hearts, he was gratified. He faced Yan Dongwu, dignified but not lacking the benevolence of an elder. "Dongwu, in the future, control Zhuaner as you should. If he dares to be rude to you, I will support you and take care of him for you. Zhuaner is just a lazy hooligan who takes one step at a time. However, there is one thing that Zhuaner is good about. He takes after me as his father. He may tire his wife, but he will never let his wife be bullied." Chapter 748. Yan Dongwu was about to thank them respectfully, but Zhao Ji grabbed his arm. "We're all family. Just be polite in front of outsiders." Zhao Zhuan felt wronged. Mother, I finally found a good daughter-in-law who speaks for me. Don't teach her bad things. When the time comes, I'll nag at you every day." The Zhao family's son smiled but didn't say anything. Empress Zhao Ji raised her hand and pretended to hit him. "Don't take it for granted." The first prince Zhao Wu gloated. "Fourth brother, you're so miserable. I won't have a chance to drink with you in the future. Go find your sixth brother." The sixth prince Zhao Chun waved his hand in panic. No. I get drunk just by smelling the wine." The emperor laughed heartily and looked around. Then he said to all the princes in a deep voice, "This time, you're all appointed as kings. You're to be stationed in different places and assist the imperial family. You're not allowed to slack off at all." Except for Zhao Zhuan, all the princes bowed and accepted the order meticulously. The two imperial concubines and Jie Yu looked at the crown prince at almost the same time. For so many years in the imperial palace, he had been amiable to everyone. Even to them, he was respectful. Even their trusted palace maids felt close to him. Originally, everyone had thought that he was a dissolute and famous scholar who planned to die of old age in a vassal state. They all looked over at the same time. The fourth prince Zhao Zhuan looked over with clear eyes and lightly nodded his chin. He still did not have the slightest impetuous attitude of someone who had achieved success. This made some of the three imperial concubines unwilling to admit defeat and a little rascally. Against such an opponent that they couldn't hate, they really couldn't vent their anger on their own son for not living up to expectations. During today's court assembly, probably because he was proud of his nearly 20 years of political and military achievements, the Liang Emperor was kind enough to grant those palace pavilions, great scholars, and Shangzhou state civil officials the privilege of not overstepping their bounds. Several great generals, who held the titles of nobility in the 4 towns and 4 campaigns, were allowed to carry swords to court. Among the military officers, Gu Jiantang was given the Nanhua saber, which was rarely seen in public. Chen Zhibao was the most outstanding. He was given a stick of plum wine. The crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, was still wearing the simple and crude Bailiang saber at his waist. However, today was different from the past. The civil and military officials were not in a hurry to enter the palace. They had to wait for the emperor, empress, and princes to arrive before they could enter. Nearly 1,000 people waited patiently on the white jade plaza outside the palace and inside the city gates. Unlike the newly crowned princes, who still had 3 days to stay in Greaton City, the 5 imperial family vassal kings would immediately leave the capital for their vassal lands after the court meeting. If the Emperor of Liang sat high on the dragon throne at this time, he would see a gathering of heroes. He indeed had a sense of heroism, as if all the heroes in the world had entered his home. The Prince of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, took a dozen steps and came to Su Fengnian's side. They looked at the south gate together. Further south to the outer city, there were nearly 18 miles of road. There were 18 lofty gates erected. Zhao Sui did not seem to be talking to others. He seemed to be lamenting to himself. In the blink of an eye, 30 years have passed. The young people who drank and talked dirty with me in the past have all grown old. Su Fengnian said calmly, Su Xiao said that he has always felt guilty towards you, Uncle Zhao. Zhao Sui smiled and said, What's there to feel guilty about? It's just that I owe you a few drinks. When you all have families and careers, in a few years, when the old men have all closed their eyes, there will be plenty of opportunities for us to drink together. Su Fengnian nodded. Zhao Sui turned his head and said, If you have the chance to go to Liao province, remember to find Zhao Yi. This kid has not admired those flying Jianghu aces for the past 2 years. He only admires you. He only has 2 words for you, and that is he is convinced. Su Fengnian was confused. Zhao Sui smiled and said, It's the truth, not just lip service. A few years ago, I heard what you said to the Taoist master mansion in Longhu Mountain on the Great Snow Plateau. This kid talks nonsense in front of me every day, and now it has become his catchphrase. As long as someone mentions to him about paying back money, he will say that. Pay back my ass. Su Fengnian looked embarrassed. Not far away, Zhao Yi, the crown prince of Jiaodong, also roughly guessed the content of the conversation. He smiled at Su Fengnian, who looked at him. Zhao Sui, the prince of Jiaodong, looked to the south. This time, the crown prince and the princes are appointed. We must guard against Chao Chongqing of West Chu coming to the capital to start a fight. I just don't know if the second in the world in the martial emperor city will guard one of the 18 city gates. Knowing that the old swordsman surnamed Sui who loved to eat swords went to the martial emperor city in the East Sea, Su Fengnian shook his head and said, I don't think so. Zhao Sui did not ask for the reason. He laughed softly and said, But I heard that the old ancestor of the Wu family, Su of Gojoseon, will take 800 swords to guard one of the gates. The other gates are guarded by many experts. I don't know if they can stop the Confucian Saint Chao Guanzi. There was an uproar. Su Fengnian looked up in the direction of the sound. He bit his lip, and an imperceptible thread of blood seeped out. Almost 1,000 flying swords rose from the ground at one of the city gates on the central axis. A blue robe broke through the sword formation, and then jumped through the gate, ignoring the flying swords chasing after him. Great Peace City was in an uproar. Chao Zhongqing rushed over from within the city gates like a hot knife through butter. There was also a young woman of unparalleled beauty who rode her sword through the 18 gates. A sword hovered above everyone's heads. She stood on the famous sword that had entered the palace like this about 23 years ago. The Great Liang Dragon Sparrow. Princess Sui Zhu, who was bored out of her mind, was jumping on the steps of the Martial Hero Palace in the side hall of the Middle Harmony Hall. Her eyes widened,
and her jaw almost dropped. Wasn't that extremely beautiful woman the same shabby maidservant on Mount Wudong who treated that shabby vegetable garden as a treasure? Her. Did she know the sword Immortal's ability to ride a sword 30,000 li? Chao Chongqing flew to the city gates and jumped onto the city tower. He stood beside the woman on the sword and said loudly, Chao Chongqing of West Chu is here to visit Great Peace City with Princess Zhang Yan.
Chapter 749. As the old saying goes, don't do things more than 3 times. However, this was the 4th time this West Chu remnant had come to the imperial palace. However, when the official Chao Zhongqing stepped into Great Peace City this time, there was a young woman by his side.
She hovered on her sword, her clothes fluttering in the wind. The civil officials who had the slightest bit of knowledge were dazed for a moment.
This woman was beautiful enough to cause the downfall of a country, right? After more than 1,000 people came back to their senses, the civil and military officials instantly changed from east to west, to north and south. The military generals, led by the 2 assistant ministers of the Ministry of War, Lu Baijie and Lu Xianxia, as well as many old great generals, rushed to the south. The civil officials retreated to the north. There were also 200 people who walked very fast or very slow. The ones who walked very fast were the next generation of West Chu people. They were very flexible and only wanted to draw a clear line between them, afraid that they would be implicated. The older generation was the complete opposite. They almost all cried at the same time. When they turned and retreated, they raised their sleeves to cover their faces and stumbled. There were dozens of old people who cried on the spot. Among them, there were some fearful descendants who wanted to support them. Without exception, the old people threw their sleeves and glared at them. This made the young talents who had finally managed to get a place in the imperial court feel ashamed and unable to show their faces. Many of the remnant officials who had been accepted into the imperial court because of the Liang imperial court also sighed emotionally and had complicated expressions. The 8 fallen countries of the spring and autumn period slowly merged into Liang. Only West Chu was still rampant, and wanted to rise from the ashes. The emperor of Liang was the first to step out of the hall. Unexpectedly, the son of the Zhao family, who had been disrespected time and time again, was not angry. He only laughed loudly and said, Mr. Chao, what a good West Chu coming to Great City. Chao Chongqing was dressed in normal green robes. His hair was white.
If he was not standing high on the walls of the imperial palace, he would be no different from an old scholar from the Hanlin Academy. The son of the Zhao family continued to laugh and said, My Liang dynasty has a white-robed monk who hangs the Yellow River in Beimang's Dao sect, and Mr. Chao has come through 18 gates. This is a blessing for my dynasty. When these words came out, the originally uneasy civil and military officials in the square all felt reassured and smiled. A talented emperor of a generation should be able to swallow the world with his aura. Chao Chongqing said calmly, I'm waiting for you to return the favor. Curses were immediately heard at Chao Qingyi's feet, cursing him for not knowing what was good for him. Most of the curses came from the mouths of the civil officials. Most of the generals were so angry that their hair stood on end. They only regretted that they did not have any weapons in their hands. Plus, they were afraid of Chao Qingyi's reputation as the Confucian saint, so they did not dare to act rashly. They were afraid that they would fail in their mission and be ridiculed instead. With a crash, someone turned their head first, and then they all turned to look at the stalwart man in the red python robe. Dragging his spear, he walked up the steps. The tip of his plum wine spear was pointed to the ground. He came to the side of the emperor and spun the body of the spear, stabbing the handle into the ground. One man could guard the pass. The plum wine turned from green to purple. With the war saint Chen Zhibao protecting the emperor, the son of the Zhao family was even more heroic. He squinted his eyes and looked at the great General Gu Zhentang at the bottom of the steps. Until now, no one had been able to shake the throne of the #1 martial art master in the Liang army. When Chen Zhibao entered the capital, everyone was looking forward to a showdown between the two. Unexpectedly, not only were the 2 old and new ministers of the Ministry of War not like fire and water, there was even a rumor that Gu Zhentang had personally brought wine to the Chen mansion for a drink. Gu Zhentang saw the prince looking at him and nodded lightly. Holding the handle of his saber, he strode forward. The generals retreated one after another. Gu Zhentang did not directly pull out his Nanhua saber. Everyone knew that Gu Zhentang had a pair of sabers. This Nanhua saber came from the collection of the Eastern Yu Imperial Palace. It was not wrong to call it a talisman saber.
It had been blessed with layers of talismans by successive generations of Taoist state teachers. Since ancient times, Eastern Yu had been the birthplace of famous swords, but the Nanhua saber still took away the title of the champion of weapons. Together with the Wudong talisman sword Shinshu in Wang Xiaoping's hands, they were known as the twin talismans. Directly south of the palace wall was Chao Chongqing, who walked barehanded, and the fallen princess Xianxia, who rode on her sword. To the east was the Wu family's sword tomb, the Su of Gojoseon, who had failed to stop them. Behind them was a large beehive created by the sword tomb's unique sword-controlling technique. 800 of the Wu family's hidden swords gathered together. To the west was Prime Minister Qingci Zhao Danping, who came from Mount Longhu. This great celestial master, who was dressed in feather clothes, stood side by side with a burly old man whose identity was unknown to the world. On the old man's back was a large sword that was almost twice the length of an ordinary ancient sword. At the foot of the wall, there were 2 rows of imperial guards holding colorful ceremonial halberds. Gu Jiantang returns the courtesy first. After Gu Jiantang finished speaking, he stretched out his arm, and a ceremonial halberd flew out from the hands of the imperial guards. Gu Jiantang, the #1 saber user in the world, rushed out in large strides and grabbed the ceremonial halberd that was flying rapidly toward him. With a soft shout, he blasted it toward Chao Chongqing on the wall like a thunderclap. Chao Qingyi took a step forward and hovered in the air. She put her index and middle fingers together, and gently raised them toward the tip of the halberd that was coming at her with the force of thunder. The ceremonial halberd that was 1.5 feet long did not break inch by inch. Instead, it shattered into fine powder. Chao Chongqing's hair was not messed up at all. Second Zhao Danping returns the courtesy. The sage-like Zhao Danping was wearing a yellow-purple Taoist robe. She was like an immortal. She raised her sleeves and took out 9 peachwood swords with peach talismans stuck on them. There were 9 flying swords. She actually used the celestial technique of Taoism's Taoism. Chao Chongqing sneered, "You are reciting the ancient language, but you are doing it as one of us. How do you ask for immortality?" The distinguished official who dominated the world stretched out a finger and pointed it lightly. Among the 9 swords, 8 of them killed each other and shattered in the air. The last sword tried its best to reach in front of Chao Chongqing. Even the weak civil officials who did not have the strength to truss up a chicken could see that it was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Chao Chongqing's finger that did not retract moved smoothly. The peachwood sword changed the direction of its tip and swept toward Zhao Danping. Its speed was much faster than that of a chicken and a falcon. Zhao Danping frowned. When the flying swords came out of her sleeves, she was outstanding. When she retracted the swords, she was embarrassed. When the flying swords returned to her sleeves, everyone saw that her Taoist robe's sleeves were swaying. It did not calm down for a long time. It was said that this great Taoist master was very familiar with eliminating demons. However, the Confucian saint's sword was full of great spirit. How could it be easy? She returned the courtesy twice, but it was resolved by the black-robed woman with a flick of her fingers. Chao Zhongqing had passed through the palace thrice, but he had never done so under the watchful eyes of so many people. Other than Hondiao Temple and a few other top experts who were hiding in the palace, no one else had seen him with their own eyes, much less experienced him. The second time he entered the palace, there were 300 imperial guards in front of him, but they were directly bypassed by the black-robed woman. At that time, if Han Diaoxi did not have the unique advantage of Shen finger against celestial phenomena, the emperor of the Zhao family would not be the emperor next to Chen Jibao. Gu Jiantang, who came out with his saber, was only halfway through returning the courtesy when he was interrupted by Prime Minister Qing Ci. He was faintly unhappy, but he still respected him as a celestial master of Longhu Mountain. He forced himself to suppress his majestic qi until the second courtesy was over. He rose from the ground and unsheathed his Nanhua saber, which almost made the world lose its color. Chao Chongqing, who had been floating in the air, took 3 steps forward. He proudly put one hand behind his back and used his right hand to welcome the Nanhua saber. His palm directly passed through the saber light and pressed down on the edge of the Nanhua saber. "What I slay is a saint." Gu Jiantang chuckled. The Nanhua saber light disappeared. He let Chao Chongqing press down on the edge of the Nanhua saber while his left and right hands pressed down on the hilt. Chao Chongqing frowned slightly and was instantly relieved. He turned his body like a spinning top and finally faced the ground with his feet facing the sky. His right hand did not leave the Nanhua saber. A muffled thunder exploded in the sky. The rumbling was incessant. The sky was clear and there were no clouds for thousands of miles. It was really a winter thunder that came without warning. Chao Chongqing held the Nanhua saber and stood still again. Gu Jiantang did not forcibly seize the saber. Instead, he took 2 steps back and floated to the ground. Chao Chongqing waved his sleeve. His sleeve was torn. 5 more thunders sounded in the sky one after another. Chao Chongqing smiled. It turns out that you are so out of your mind. You are indeed Gu Jiantang, who made the saber extraordinary. He gently threw the Nanhua saber to Gu Jiantang, who had landed on the square. Gu Jiantang did not pester him endlessly. He hung the Nanhua saber and turned to walk forward. At this time, everyone saw the path behind Chao Chongqing slanting to the 9th heaven. The clouds shook violently and ordinary people could see it clearly. On the stairs, Chen Zhibao and the emperor whispered. The latter was enlightened. The Earth Immortals were the so-called superior celestial beings in the world. However, Chao Chongqing was a Confucian saint. He had not been here for a long time, but he had already reached the peak of the Earth Immortal realm. He was probably only 1.5 levels away from Ancestor Lu, who passed through the gate of heaven and returned hundreds of years ago. Chao Chongqing, who had used all his strength and only had a slightly tattered sleeve, looked calm.
Many of the civil officials in the square suddenly remembered the words he had said to all of West Chu when this person had entered the Saint realm at the Western Wall.
Chao Chongqing is willing to die for the world to be turned upside down. I am willing to die for the world to be peaceful. Chao Chongqing was so close to being invincible. But immediately, everyone felt a sharp sword intent, which was piercing and cold.
As far as the eyes of the woman on the sword could see, the civil officials and generals on the line subconsciously moved to the left and right to avoid it. Until one person floated to the surface.
Su Fengmian of Beiliang. That year, West Chu fell. That year, she had dimples on her cheeks. That year, his hair had not turned white. Chapter 750. Jiujiu restaurant was closed. Auntie Hong lived in a courtyard with 3 entrances not far away. The woman's body was Yin in nature, so she was afraid of the cold. She and a young woman sat cross-legged on the Kong bed. The woman chewed on melon seeds and muttered to herself. The young woman quietly listened to Auntie Hong's nagging without the slightest impatience. Usually, after the women in the fields finished their chores and farm work, those who had a little skill liked to pick up a delicate pair of scissors to spend their free time. They couldn't just focus on having children with their men as soon as the sky turned dark. Besides, they couldn't afford to raise too many children. Although Auntie Hong was an old widow, she could still be considered pretty. However, no one dared to knock on the widow's door and cause trouble. In her free time, she only liked to cut paper. She was clever and skillful. Every time there was a happy occasion, the neighbors were willing to come to Auntie Hong's side to ask for some time-consuming and laborious happiness flowers and marriage flowers. The window next to the Kong bed was covered with Auntie Hong's delicate paper cuts. It was true to the saying of the older generation that when the window was opened, Auntie Hong would hang a sweeper under the eaves on cloudy days. It was very effective. Auntie Hong chewed on melon seeds. Occasionally, she would free her hands to teach the woman beside her how to cut paper. However, the woman's appearance was boundless, but her hands were clumsy. This caused Auntie Hong to tease her good-naturedly. Auntie Hong couldn't stop talking and talked about this and that. In the end, most of it was about that family. These two should blame lame Su. The little guy should also blame his parents. One can't bear to part with Su Xiao, and the other can't bear to part with those dead brothers. In the end, the one who suffers is still their own child. They should blame those so-called loyal officials. Su Xiao isn't a gentleman who is full of benevolence, righteousness, and morality, but he does things openly. How can a bullshit gentleman compare to him? When has Su Xiao ever let anyone down that he deserves? Zhao Ji is just narrow-minded. She can't bear to see Wu Su being more outstanding than her. She can't bear to see Su Xiao being more manly than her man. Whoever knows her is unlucky. The young woman was cutting a magpie. After it took shape, it was awkward and funny. She smiled. Auntie Hong smiled and comforted her. Not bad. This is your first time using scissors. The woman put down the red paper and sighed. Aunt Hong looked at the window lattice, lost in thought. The western wall was in a deadlock. Ma Ling, 14 former subordinates of Beiliang, including Ma Ling, crashed their bodies to their deaths in front of the palace gate.
helping the great General Su Shao quell the boiling rumor that he was going to conquer West Chu by drawing the river. White robes and white mourning dresses beat the war drums and settled the world with a single battle. That year of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn, although western Shu and southern Tang were still struggling at death's door, in reality, it was already difficult for them to escape from the Yang, Su and Gu families' iron cavalry. The Su family's iron cavalry was only 300 miles away from West Chu's imperial city. Su Shao was sent 4 urgent imperial edicts a day, 800 miles away, to the capital to be rewarded, but what awaited this meritorious official was the white robe case in the capital. This caused West Chu to be surrounded for 3 years without perishing. At that time, the Prince Zhao Yi, who had not yet been conferred the title of Duke of Guangling, wanted to take advantage of the situation to gain great military merits, but he did not expect to lose 2 battles in a row. He suffered heavy losses and greatly damaged his vitality. In the end, he could only continue to be led by Su Shao on an expedition to the south, and finally broke through the lofty divine Phoenix City. During those 3 years, the young Su Fengnian was a hostage and was placed under house arrest at Dantong Pass, 300 miles south of Great Peace City. There were 600 soldiers stationed inside the pass, and more than 10,000 iron cavalry outside the pass, all for the sake of targeting the female sword Immortal and the young child. The woman suddenly asked, "Auntie Hong, don't you regret meeting Uncle Sun Ping?" The woman shook her head and smiled. "Chen Yu, when you truly fall in love with someone, you won't ask such a silly question." The woman also shook her head. "It's a pity that we didn't meet." Auntie Hong suddenly thought of something and said with a gloomy expression, "Serves bald donkey Yang right for dropping in cultivation. It's good that he died. When can we kill Yuan Benshi and teacher Lu how to our satisfaction?" Chen Yu asked, "Who can kill them?" Auntie Hong smiled and said, "In any case, it can't be a woman like me. Small scissors can only cut paper." Chen Yu picked up the magpie ascending plum and raised it above her head. Light shone through the gap, illuminating her beautiful face that could cause the downfall of a country. Even Auntie Hong, who had shamed the moon and embarrassed the flowers in her youth, felt somewhat envious and emotional. Chen Yu, they really had the foresight to name her. Auntie Hong asked, "Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to enter the imperial palace of Great Peace City, and instead go to a barren place like Bailiang to suffer?" Chen Yu directly asked, "Auntie, are you saying that I will be betrothed to that heir of Bailiang?" Auntie Hong nodded. Chen Yu smiled faintly. "Isn't it all the same?" Auntie Hong dismissed it with a smile and waved the small scissors. "Come, I'll teach you how to cut a cockfight." Chen Yu stilled. Auntie Hong explained with a smile, "Cockfight, the homonym is auspicious. The meaning is auspicious." Everyone stared dazedly at the fallen princess of West Chu that had appeared out of nowhere. The old officials of the capital did not hinder their love for beauty. They had truly never seen such an outstanding woman. Maybe that Chen Yu on the Rouge rankings could compare to her appearance, but in the end, Chen Yu was a woman who could only pick up a brush and embroider a needle. She definitely would not come on a sword. The woman whose original name was Xianxia, but who had been changed by a bastard to Jiang Ni, lightly uttered 5 words. The law of the heavens was vast. The scabbard did not move. The great Liang dragon sparrow had already left its scabbard to take the head. The 2 sword energies of Big Yellow and Big Purple wrapped around the slender ancient sword. It headed towards an eye-catching white python robe on the square. The moment before the flying sword left its scabbard, Yuan Tingshan, who had been allowed to enter the Dragon Gate and participate in the court meeting, smiled nastily. He looked at his future father-in-law, Gu Jiantang, and extended a hand. "Great General, lend me a blade." Gu Jiantang's expression was calm. He did not show any hesitation, nor did he make any unnecessary movements. The Nanhua saber at his waist came out of its scabbard like a dragon out of water. Yuan Tingshan, who had come from a humble background but suddenly enjoyed wealth, did not have any mentality of cherishing his fortune. He wanted to amaze everyone in Great Peace City. He had almost gone crazy these days. If he did not act now, when would he? You nobles enjoy wealth and have a clear conscience. I, your father, have to risk my life every time. Wealth comes from danger. Whoever stops me will die. The moment Yuan Tingshan, whose realm had skyrocketed, grasped the Nanhua saber, his hair was disheveled. It was as if he was possessed by a celestial being, as if he was possessed by a fiery demon. With the saber in his hand, he instantly knew that the great general had not only borrowed the Nanhua saber, but also contained a vast amount of vital energy. With such good intentions, how could Yuan Tingshan disappoint his father-in-law, the #1 saber user in the world? Yuan Tingshan gripped the saber with both hands. His eyes were red. With a furious roar, he chopped at the flying sword that had fallen to the ground. On the city gate tower, Chao Qingyi, who was fighting against Gu Jiantang and Zhao Danping, turned a blind eye. She calmly said, "West Chu returns the Bailiang salute." Chapter 751. This was a true thunderclap rising from the ground. Yuan Tingshan, whose notoriety had spread far and wide, swung his saber down. It was so ingenious that it struck the tip of the great Liang dragon sparrow sword. However, the flying sword still flew straight ahead without trembling at all. The Nanhua saber, one of the twin talismans, slid past the flying sword. The square at the foot of Yuan Ting Mountain cracked so much that rocks flew everywhere. The noise was ear-piercing. Fortunately, behind this mad dog were high-ranking military officers who were trained in martial arts. Facing the sudden disaster, other than Lu Xianxia and Lu Baijia, who casually waved their sleeves to disperse the flying rocks, most of the others were in a very difficult situation. Su Fengnian took a step forward with his left foot and a step back with his right foot. He raised both hands. One hand cut the river. The other shook Kunlun. One sword broke the two forces. The tip of the sword went straight to Su Fengnian's chest. Su Fengnian said, "Sword, come." Black armor, childhood sweetheart, morning dew, spring water, peach blossoms, moth eyebrows, vermilion bird, yellow tongue, yellow mayfly, golden thread, Tai E. Ding ding dong dong 12 times. It resounded in the imperial city. The tip of the sword didn't change its direction, only 10 feet away from Su Fengnian's heart. Wind rolled and clouds surged between heaven and earth. Then, a streak of dazzling red fell to the ground, like a bolt of lightning from the heavenly court descending to the mortal world. It tried to stand between the flying sword and Su Fengnian. This pinnacle celestial phenomenon, otherworldly being stepped on the tip of the flying sword. It had 6 arms. It showed compassion and looked at Su Fengnian with joy. Since the immortal Qi Xuanzhen killed the demon on the Lotus platform 60 years ago, this was probably the first time people saw the demon come to the world. The otherworldly item stood on tiptoe. The flying sword flipped in front of it and swept into the air. Zhang Enai was expressionless. He stretched out a finger and waved it gently. Chao Chongqing continued indifferently. West Chu's second return to Liang. Although the flying sword failed to assassinate the crown prince of Bailiang, it still had a lot of energy left. It flew over the heads of the otherworldly item in the red robe and the man in the white robe and flew toward the emperor of Liang, who was standing on the stairs. The sword Qi was like the Milky Way and the stars in the sky. The Zhao clan's son clenched his fists and didn't retreat a single step. Chen Zhibao reached out to hold the plum wine. He pressed down. The plum wine instantly disappeared. 100,000 soldiers were lying in ambush in Qidi. 10 steps away from the son of the Zhao family, the plum wine broke out of the ground and collided with the tip of the flying sword. He hovered in midair for a moment. There was clearly no sound, but the civil and military officials who did not know martial arts immediately covered their ears and squatted on the ground. Some of the weaker civil officials even showed signs of bleeding from their 7 orifices. Lu Shengxiang, Sword Immortal Tang Shi, Lu Baijia, and the others leaped high into the air, separating the plum wine from the thousands of people and the chaotic, formless qi that was leaking out like a flood. The plum wine finally bounced back into Chen Zhibao's hand. Standing on the scabbard, Zhang Enai coldly snorted. The flying sword flashed and disappeared back into the scabbard. Almost at the same time, Su Fengnian, whose blood was getting thicker and thicker at the corner of his mouth, grabbed the otherworldly item's arm and fiercely threw it to one side of the palace wall. The red robe with big sleeves, like a big red bat in the daytime, pounced on the tall and sturdy old man next to Zhao Danping, one of the 2 masters guarding the palace. In terms of realm, he was even higher than Xian Ji Han Diaosi. Master Lu Hao. After throwing the otherworldly item, Su Fengnian stepped forward nearly 10 zhang in one step, floating toward Yuan Tingshan. In Gangnam-do, he once wanted to kill Su Jihu. Su Fengnian raised his arm, his 5 fingers like hooks, and said in a low voice, "Sword, come again." Xian Lei, Tai A, Peach Blossom, Jin Lu, Huang Tong. 5 flying swords with the sharpest sword qi smashed down at the same time. The immortal caresses the big top. Yuan Tingshan's face changed dramatically.
His Nanhua saber raised a dazzling saber light. At the same time, he retreated step by step. However, his palm was bleeding from the web between his thumb and index finger. After taking 3 steps back, he rolled sideways. A string of blood splashed out from his back. A flying sword hovered in a tricky position, cutting the official robe that he had always dreamed of. It was not easy for him to roll away from the danger. However, 5 more flying swords poured on his head like cold water. Yuan Tingshan's face was ferocious. He had a bright future, but he had just taken a few steps forward. How could he wait to die here? Gritting his teeth, he pulled out his Nanhua saber and hit away 3 flying swords. He tilted his head, dodging 1 flying sword that brushed past his cheek. Then, he used the momentum of the Nanhua saber to hit the last flying sword on his chest before it pierced through his heart. Yuan Tingshan, who was not standing firmly, staggered. Eventually, he managed to stand firm. He touched the blood on his face. Instead of being angry, he laughed and said, "Come again if you have the guts." The civil and military officials in the square were speechless. What a crazy dog that was not afraid of death. Then, almost everyone was dumbfounded. They saw Su Fengnian slowly walking forward. However, Yuan Tingshan, who was inexplicably hostile to the Crown Prince of Bailiang, was like a grass carp that had unfortunately fallen on the shore. He was jumping around and struggling for his life. The distance was less than 5 feet. Yuan Tingshan's blood kept splashing everywhere. The world only knew that the Peach Blossom Sword God Dong Tai had 12 flying swords in his small box. No one knew that there was another person in the world who could control so many flying swords. Finally, the distance was 3 feet. Yuan Tingshan, who had been waiting for this moment, dodged the 3 fatal flying swords. He let 2 of the flying swords penetrate his body and chopped down with his saber. The officials in the square, who did not dare to breathe, were all sweating. They were hoping that this crazy dog could kill the Crown Prince of Bailiang with 1 strike. However, the next scene made most people feel incredulous. Only Lu Xianxia and Lu Baijie shook their heads. They felt that it was a pity, but they were also amazed. Yuan Tingshan withdrew his saber against the flow of qi. Lu Xianxia felt that it was a pity that at the moment of life and death, Yuan Tingshan did not hesitate. However, in the end, he still cherished his life and did not do that shady business of exchanging a life for a life. Lu Baijie was amazed at Su Fengnian's audacity. This person could have won relatively easily, but he did not. He still dared to bet that Yuan Tingshan was more afraid of death than him. This kind of fight had left a huge shadow in Yuan Tingshan's heart. It was likely that he would not be able to erase it for the rest of his life. Su Fengnian slapped Yuan Tingshan's chest with his palm. He took a few steps forward and grabbed one of Yuan Tingshan's feet in the air. He turned around and suddenly smashed it on the ground. A big hole. Yuan Tingshan was clearly at his last breath. Gu Jiantang, who had been watching the fight with narrowed eyes, finally took a step forward. If Yuan Tingshan wanted to die in the capital, he had to go through Gu Jiantang. A gentle breeze rose. The white-haired young man stood quietly in the square. His python robe swayed in the wind. Just like his life experience, which was in a precarious situation. The eldest son of the Su family, who no one was optimistic about, finally tore off his tattered clothes. He had a kind of indescribable peerless elegance. Su Fengnian looked at Yuan Tingshan in the hole and grinned. You are not worthy of my saber. Today, you are lucky to have a good father-in-law. Next time, I will personally peel off your skin. Chapter 752. Gu Jiantang glanced at Yuan Tingshan, who was lying motionless in the pit, his hands still tightly gripping the Nanhua saber. Gu Jiantang didn't think that the Crown Prince of Bailiang was so daring as to kill an official under the emperor's nose. Teaching Yuan Tingshan, who had an old grudge, a lesson was just a little too much. The people of the capital wouldn't really care about Su Fengnian. After all, his preposterous behavior had already caused calluses in the ears of the great peace city. Furthermore, he had blocked 10,000 imperial students on the imperial road and even spat at them. This could be considered as foreshadowing today's fight, but it wasn't too strange. After all, hiding one's strength for more than 20 years, the heavens rewarded the diligent. In the end, there were great benefits. If it was a crown prince who had always had an excellent reputation, he would have been dragged away and stripped of his hereditary bestowment. There were actually only 2 things that really interested Gu Jiantang. First, Why did Dong Tai's 12 flying swords end up in Su Fengnian's hands? Second, the origin of the red-robed otherworldly item that had pounced on Lu Haosher. Ordinary otherworldly items simply couldn't enter the imperial city that was filled with purple and yellow dragon aura. Ever since the devil sect that occupied half of Jianghu completely vanished after the battle at the devil-slaying platform, the world publicly acknowledged that there was no longer a heavenly demon. Gu Jiantang was in a daze for a moment. Even though he had been the Minister of War for 18 years, he still suddenly became furious. That Su family's child actually went back on his word and played hard to get with him. With just a thought, a flying sword with a perfect sword embryo pierced straight towards Yuan Tingshan's head. This made Gu Jiantang extremely shocked and angry. Under the feet of the emperor, Yu, a crown prince of a different surname, relied on the muddled debt that the Zhao family owed the Su family to collect some old debts. You picked the best time to pull chestnuts out of the fire. Gu Jiantang turned a blind eye and let you do whatever you wanted. However, you didn't know the severity of the matter and dared to insult me, Gu Jiantang, in front of all the important officials of Liang. Did you really think that I was a drowning dog that everyone could beat? Gu Jiantang used his sleeve to control his qi and wave away the flying sword Peach Blossom. Just as he was about to raise his hand to control the Nanhua saber to teach this crazy little Bailiang barbarian a lesson, he inadvertently caught a glimpse of a smile that flashed across the corners of Su Fengnian's mouth. Gu Jiantang, who had experienced the ups and downs of the officialdom to the point that even the 8 winds could not move him, withdrew his intense killing intent in the blink of an eye. He calmly said, Yuan Tingshan used his saber to block the sword, which was a great disrespect to the Bailiang. It was indeed impolite of him to teach you a lesson. However, if you want to kill Yuan Tingshan, whether it's today or next time, I will draw my saber at you once. 1 generation of grudges. 1 generation of grudges. This was the pride that only a few pillars of the imperial court possessed. If Gu Jiantang made a move against the younger Su Fengnian today, he was destined to be criticized by the world. Gu Jiantang was the #1 saber user in the world. If he won, there would be no glory, but he couldn't seriously injure him. If he got in the way, it would only increase the Bailiang's heir apparent's arrogance. Gu Jiantang had never been stingy with gifts to the direct subordinates of the Ministry of War. However, Gu Jiantang, who was in front of him, was usually too lazy to even look at the eldest son of the butcher's heir apparent. Su Fengnian shook the sleeves of his python robe, and the 12 flying swords returned to their original positions. Then, he gently inserted his hands into his sleeves. This action was filled with the aura of a commoner. It was exactly the same as Su Zhao's. As the saying goes, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, Minister Gu's thunder of mind, which can kill the saints of the 3 religions, has really opened my eyes. I'll have to experience it in the future. Minister Gu was a playful way of addressing Meng Qi's sore spot. Gu Jiantang did not pretend to be magnanimous and laugh it off. Lame Su could place a Bailiang saber on his shoulder in front of the generals of both sides and slap him wantonly. It was extremely humiliating. Gu Jiantang could endure it again and again. However, in front of Su Fengnian, Gu Jiantang did not have that kind of calmness. This had nothing to do with tolerance. Gu Jiantang was one of the 4 great generals of the spring and autumn period, who resigned from his position as the Minister of War and was given the title of Pillar of the State. This was the first time in his life that Gu Jiantang stared so seriously at the eldest son of the Su family. I'll wait for you to come to Liao to worship your ancestors. As long as you dare to compete with me for the title of #1 saber user, within the territory of Liao, no one will dare to scheme against you except for me. Su Fengnian still had his hands in his sleeves in a lazy and roguish manner. Gu Jiantang waved his hand, and 2 eunuchs led a group of Yulin guards to carry out the bloodied Yuan Tingshan from the pit. Gu Jiantang glanced at the young mad dog with a deathly still expression and a deathly gaze. Scarlet blood flowed down the Nanhua saber and dripped onto the square. Gu Jiantang said indifferently, From today onwards, the Nanhua saber will belong to you, Yuan Tingshan. Treat it as Beihu's dowry. Yuan Tingshan slowly turned his head and looked at the great general who replaced the king of Bailiang as the only pillar of the state in the dynasty. His eyes exploded with a touch of spirit, and he grinned with difficulty. Chapter 753. Gu Jiantang ignored him and only raised his head to look at Chao Chongqing and the woman on the sword on top of the southern city wall. The central government of the imperial court had long predicted that West Chu would come to the capital to observe the ceremony. Su of Gojoseon of the Wu family of the Sword Mound had also come out of seclusion because of this. The central government had 18 gates, led by the great grandmaster of the Way of the Sword, Su of Gojoseon. Other than that, there were no less than 6 or 7 top-notch masters who had long resided in the deep pool that was the capital. Some time ago, Gu Jiantang had recommended himself to guard one of the gates of the imperial court to stop Chao Qingyi, but the emperor had not allowed it. It could be said that Chao Chongqing's appearance was not a surprise to Gu Jiantang and the small group of people. As long as West Chu still wanted to reclaim their country, today was undoubtedly the best opportunity for them to show themselves. This was the same fallacious logic as Su Fengnian wanting to vent his anger in the capital, so he had no choice but to make an unreasonable move at this time. However, as a general who had been in charge of the Ministry of War for nearly 20 years, Gu Jiantang did not think highly of West Chu's chances of reclaiming their country. It was even very likely that this would become the perfect opening for Zhang Julu to vent his undercurrents. The purple-bearded, blue-eyed man who had been in charge of Liang and reorganized the governance of the country had faced an enormous resistance that the outside world could not imagine. It seemed that he was relying on the emperor's trust and his momentum was like a rainbow, but as for how and when he would fiercely rebound, even Gu Jiantang did not dare to imagine. Was this ceremony not a kind of tacit understanding that could not be revealed to outsiders? Chao Chongqing was confident in the methods of the Chao Chongqing. If Great Peace City dared to shed all pretense of cordiality, West Chu, who had made a great wish when he became a saint to use his life to turn the world upside down, dared to risk his life and let the fallen princess leave on her sword. Then, he would use the life of a saint to exchange for the coronation of King in Jing. This would become a tragedy of hundreds of officials dying. If the emperor really wanted to prevent Chao Chongqing from entering Great Peace City, he could have had Gu Jiantang, Pei Nanhua, Chen Jibao take the plum wine, the old ancestor of the sword tomb Su of Gojoseon, and teacher Lu guard the 4 city gates with their elite factions. If they encountered Chao Chongqing, they only needed to delay him for a few minutes. The other 3 could immediately bring people to surround and kill him. However, to Gu Jiantang's surprise, the emperor and Zhang Julu, as well as the broken-tongued strategist who had never left Great Peace City in his entire life, did not have such a conservative plan. They still allowed Chao Chongqing to swagger to the top of the city walls and announce to the world that West Chu had reclaimed its country. Gu Jiantang smiled. When Liang and West Chu faced off against each other, no one could have guessed that the result would be a draw. However, after 20 years of peace and tranquility, West Chu was trying to use half of its country's power to resist the alliance of the other spring and autumn countries. A snake swallowing an elephant? Gu Jiantang shook his head. In the end, Chao Chongqing still had the spirit of a scholar. The emperor of Liang took a step forward and said in a clear voice, "I hope that in my lifetime, I can peacefully play chess with Sir Chao in this great peace palace city and make friends." Chao Chongqing smiled and did not reply. Jiang Enai flew away from the top of the city walls on his sword, causing the civil officials and generals in the square to tremble with fear. She twitched the corner of her mouth. The great Liang dragon sparrow soared into the clouds and disappeared. 2 dimples appeared on her cheeks. Was she laughing at him until his hair turned white? Chao Chongqing immediately turned and flew away. The emperor let Song Tonglu, the head of the imperial palace, go up the steps and said softly. Then this powerful official walked near the steps and faced the square. He said in a deep voice, "The Bailiang heir Su Fengnian is allowed to withdraw from court. He does not need to report to the court when he leaves the city." After Su Fengnian heard the imperial edict, he still put his hands in his sleeves and turned to leave. The Zhao family's son, who had been paying attention to the Bailiang heir's next move, narrowed his eyes. However, he quickly relaxed and his expression returned to normal. Almost at the same time that Su Fengnian turned around, he walked towards the main hall and crossed the threshold. The Zhao and Su families parted ways. Most of the officials swallowed their saliva when Su Fengnian turned around. Especially the Imperial College's Right Chancellor Jean Lanting, who was supposed to be high-spirited. His face was dispirited as if he had lost his parents. After Su Fengnian walked out of the city gates, he stopped. The item Dan Ing was connected to his mind. It was not inferior to the flying sword that he no longer needed to use his qi to control. After it threw the old hidden dragon into the city walls, in less than half an hour, it had silently gone back and forth between life and death countless times. The item's arms drooped dispiritedly. Its bright red robe was also somewhat tattered. After all, it was a item. In the peak duel between celestial state experts in Great Peace City, it did not occupy the right time. This was a fatal disadvantage. For it to be able to do this, it was already shocking enough. It was rumored that Lu Haoshi, who had been in celestial state for longer than a normal person's lifetime, stood quietly at the foot of the wall. There was not the slightest trace of anger on his face. His eyes were as gloomy as a poisonous snake's, tightly biting onto the Bailiang air. Su Fengnian first smiled at the item. Then he walked towards Lu Haoshi. When he was dozens of feet away, he stopped and said, "Don't die of old age too quickly." The old man's laughter was hoarse, like an old donkey grinding mud with a millstone. He stretched out a palm and made a flipping motion. This old man couldn't kill the big one in the past. Killing the small one is just a... Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and wiped the corner of his mouth. The old bastard is hiding in the deep pool. I can't do anything to him for now.
However, the 10 great clans of the spring and autumn period, the Nanyang Lu family that respects you as their ancestor, and the many talents that have the potential to serve the imperial court, I will send people to eliminate the weeds by the roots.
Will you save them or not? I purposely didn't do these dirty things before because I wanted to talk to you in person after entering the capital. The old man was indifferent and emotionless.
He sneered. The clay Buddha crossing the river can't even save himself.
How dare you talk nonsense in front of this old man? Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Great rivers and mountains. Let's ride a donkey and wait and see." The white-haired young man put his hands in his sleeves and slowly walked on the imperial road.
The item in the red robe looked at the lonely figure with joy and pity.
It looked at Lu Haoshi, who was trying hard to suppress his killing intent. After Su Fengnian walked for a while, he pulled out his hands. Without turning his head, he suddenly asked, "From now on, you will be called Suing, okay?" The item stretched out an arm and gently pulled on one of his sleeves. The man and the item seemed to depend on each other. They didn't say anything as they walked hand in hand on the central axis of Great Peace City. Chapter 754. Su Fengnian walked alone to the carriage that deviated from the central axis. The coachman was naturally Blue Bird, who was dressed in green and embroidered shoes. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who carried the imperial jade seal, was dressed in purple and sat sideways behind Blue Bird. His legs dangled outside the carriage. Seeing Su Fengnian leave court so early, although Xianyuan Qingfeng was puzzled, he didn't ask. They sat in the carriage together. After Su Fengnian sat down, he smiled and said, "West Chu returned a sword strike to me. We'll leave the capital later and let Mr. Chow wait for a few more days. At the same time, we'll scare that Han Diaosi who's waiting for us somewhere. This Confucian sage won't be in the capital to retrieve the imperial jade seal. You should seize the time to absorb fate." Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned and said, "Only 40 to 50%. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "One must be content with what one has. Getting 50 to 60% is good enough. Going too far is as bad as falling short. Fate is unpredictable. If something goes wrong, you'll be the one to suffer, not me. Come, take it out and let me take a look. I'll help you." Xianyuan Qingfeng wanted to say something but stopped. He snorted coldly and didn't move in the end. Su Fengnian was confused and said helplessly, "Do you really think this imperial jade seal is your exclusive property? Borrowing money and returning it is a matter of course. In the past, you were rude and unreasonable to me, but that was because I was easy to talk to and didn't lower myself to your level. I've been hiding it for the past few years. Chen Zhibao is even more ruthless than me. He's already become a saint. During the Battle of Iron Gate, Chen Zhibao was at the peak of martial arts and still couldn't defeat Chao Qingyi. If you offend this West Chu and delay his great cause of restoring the country, you're destined to suffer. Besides, when it comes to the fate of the imperial jade seal, you're thousands of miles away from your father. You're just a layman, far inferior to me. I'll help you take a look and fill in the gaps. Are you still not satisfied?" Xianyuan Qingfeng hesitated again and again, staring at Su Fengnian. Finally, she slowly extended 2 slender fingers, tilted her face, and pinched a red string that held the imperial jade seal from her neck. She gently lifted it. Looking at the scenery on her chest, she should have pulled out the imperial jade seal from between her 2 peaks. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, "No wonder you're so shy. In the end, you're a woman who can't be thick-skinned when it comes to matters like this." Su Fengnian immediately pretended to be serious and old-fashioned so that she wouldn't fly into a rage out of humiliation.
He calmly took the red string that still had traces of warmth and lowered his head to stare at the imperial jade seal of West Chu.
Xianyuan Qingfeng turned her head away and covered her chest. It was impossible to see whether she was angry or shy. Under the string, the imperial jade seal appeared to be sparkling and translucent. Yellow and purple qi rapidly circulated within it, like a river during the summer flood season or a chick leaving its nest. Its heart was still directed towards Xianyuan Qingfeng. The fate leaked out from the imperial jade seal, drifting together and seeping into Xianyuan Qingfeng's 7 apertures and 3 dantian. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry.
He raised his head to look at the woman who was still angry at him and angrily scolded. How is this 40 or 50%?
You've clearly stolen 60 or 70%.
I've wronged you when I said that you only knew how to squander money.
Just like Su Fengnian said, Xianyuan Qingfeng was a genuine layman. After obtaining the imperial jade seal, she only immersed herself in absorbing the fate contained within the imperial jade seal. After hearing the truth, she was also a bit excited. Is it really 60 or 70%? Su Fengnian nodded.
Try pouring out all of your qi. In the blink of an eye, the sea of qi in the carriage shook. The 2 horses abruptly stopped in their tracks, looking like they would not be shaken even by thunder.
Su Fengnian's hair fluttered unsteadily as he clicked his tongue.
Narrowing his eyes, he sighed emotionally.
Using the words of the Taoist qi cultivators, it's like steaming the Cloud Dream Marsh, shaking the Jade Emperor Tower, and shaking the Kunlun Mountains.
It's not far off from the great yellow court of the Wudong sect leader.
Xianyuan Qingfeng closed her eyes and spread out her arms.
In the region of Great Peace City near the palace, invisible qi rapidly converged with the carriage as the center.
She had an intoxicated expression on her face. The imperial jade seal in Su Fengnian's hand shook more and more violently.
He said in a low voice, "Stop, stop."
Xianyuan Qingfeng quickly came back to her senses and withdrew her qi. She seemed to have sensed that her actions were too docile.
She glared fiercely at Su Fengnian, who had given the order.
Su Fengnian did not care about the arrogance and unruliness that he had brought out of her mother's womb. He also did not think about how to put in effort to suppress and train her. If all women had their edges removed, like Lu Chengyan of Qingzhou, all of them would be as smooth and sophisticated as pebbles. How boring would it be whether it was the Jianghu or the residents? He handed her the red string and the imperial jade seal. Take advantage of these few days to absorb a little bit more. It's not good for others to become fat in one mouthful when their hearts are not enough. Especially women. They don't look good if they are too fat.
Xianyuan Qingfeng stared quietly at this fellow and said ungratefully, "It's not funny at all."
Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and smiled.
It's really cold.
After this year's winter, Great Peace City was indeed exceptionally cold. Su Fengnian waited for Xianyuan Qingfeng to turn around and put the imperial jade seal back into the depression in the mountain range. He suddenly asked, "Xianyuan Qingfeng, have you realized that you are actually very talented in scheming? Other people rely on practical knowledge and experience in the field of politics, but you rely on intuition?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said with disdain, "Don't think that I will be your Baoyang's dog. I will do business with you one by one." Su Fengnian shook his head. "Don't be nervous. I am not so desperate that I am not picky. It's just that I am in a rare good mood, so I will reward you verbally." Xianyuan Qingfeng hit the nail on the head. "You have made things clear with Lu Hao of the white clothes case in the capital? Have you set up the arena? After leaving the capital this time, you have completely cleared things with the Zhao family's son. In the future, you will rely on your own abilities to draw a line publicly?" Su Fengnian nodded with a smile. Chapter 755. There were many things in the imperial court that were deeply arranged behind layers of curtains. Every step was carefully planned, and every little detail was fought over. However, when put on the table and in the eyes of the court officials, it was often just that. It was very difficult to see the brilliance at a glance. Su Fengnian came to the capital to observe the ceremony as the heir of a vassal king. On the surface, he entered the palace with a saber and did not kneel. Undoubtedly, the emperor of the Zhao family gave him a lot of face. However, other than this sweet date, the other big sticks that came down were all firmly on Baoyang's head. Making an exception to promote Jean Lanting as the right chancellor of the Imperial College, seducing the great scholar of Confucianism Yao Baifeng to take a post in the capital, promoting Chen Jibao, the protector of Baoyang, to the minister of war, and promoting Yan Jieshi,
the magistrate of Lingzhou, to the most illustrious member of the imperial family in one fell swoop. These 4 big sticks were all openly beaten on Su Fengnian's head in front of all the civil and military officials. How could Su Fengnian not take advantage of this situation to make a big fuss? It looked like he was acting out of spite, but it could also be that Su Fengnian was using his own method to stabilize the Bailiang cavalry's morale. The carriage slowly returned to Xiama Wei Station. The rotten scholar Lu Wenbao was no different from an old beggar. He was still waiting bitterly under the dragon claw locust tree, waiting for Bailiang's heir to give him a chance to fulfill his ambitions. At this moment, he was squatting and gnawing on a cold and hard steamed bun. Although he had suffered in the areas of clothing, food, shelter and transportation, he seemed to be in good spirits.
Most of these people were like this. As long as there was a little bit of hope to look forward to, they could display astonishing tenacity. This was related to one's heart. Lu Wenbao was undoubtedly the type of person who had a big mouth and a big heart. After Su Fengnian got off the carriage, he still did not even look at Lu Wenbao. He did not even bother to cast a sideways glance at Lu Wenbao.
Normally, a scholar who was confident that his knowledge and military strategy were not inferior to other people's would have already turned to other wise masters.
However, Lu Wenbao's life had been full of ups and downs, but he still had his pride and unyielding character. The pride he gained from studying the sage's books had almost completely dissipated.
Naturally, he had the great willpower to stick to the Green Mountain and not let go.
But to be exact, it seemed more appropriate to stick to the Su family's locust tree next to him. Seeing that Su Fengnian was about to enter the post house, Lu Wenbao trotted over and said softly, "Young Master Su, someone is looking for you. It's a young lady with the surname Li. She didn't enter the post house and just wanted to chat with me. She waited for a long time, but in the end, she couldn't endure the hunger and went to buy food." Su Fengnian was stunned. He laughed and said, "Did she say that her family lives in a temple and that the temple belongs to her family?" Lu Wenbao nodded vigorously and said with a smile, "Yes, yes. The young lady is quite interesting. I was just wondering why there would be a girl living in a temple." Su Fengnian was truly in a good mood this time. He said to Lu Wenbao, "Go to the post house and find a warm place. If Tong Ziliang asks, tell him that I told you to stay." Unexpectedly, the old scholar did not know what was good for him. He shook his head and said, "I don't care about a day or two. Lu Wenbao can endure hardships. He has already endured so many years. I think that when the hardships are over, the good times will be great." Su Fengnian didn't try to be courteous with an old scholar in his 50s who didn't even have a family yet. Shenyuan Qingfeng had already entered the inn. He had Qingniao enter first, and he stayed behind to welcome Miss Li Zi. Lu Wenbao asked carefully and curiously, "Young master, why did you end court so quickly?" Su Fengnian said half-truthfully, "I almost fought with Gu Jiantang, so I was chased back."
Lu Wenbao was speechless and did not dare to ask further. In the distance, the young girl who was determined to be a chivalrous woman of the Zhonghu jumped up and down towards the post house. If it was not easy for her to find out that Su Fengnian lived in Xiamawi, she would feel that she had gone through many hardships and traversed mountains to come here. This friendship that only Zhonghu women could have. There was nothing else to say. She had brought a few banknotes with her on this trip, but she had told her clumsily to give gifts to people she met. She had not thought about how to buy clothes or cosmetics, so she only had a few pitiful pieces of silver and copper coins. Today, she had woken up early for the first time and rushed outside Xiamawi. She had forgotten to fill her stomach early in the morning and shivered from the cold. In the end, she could not endure the stomachache and bought a tray of white steamed buns. Because of these 8 or 9 steamed buns, her impression of Great Peace City was terrible to the extreme. It was too expensive. If she had traveled the Zhonghu in the capital with Su Fengnian, she would have most likely starved to death long ago. She bit hard on an expensive steamed bun that she had bought a few at the foot of the mountain and jumped up and down towards the post house. She saw a familiar figure in the distance, but that person was dressed in white, with white hair, white clothes and white shoes. Why did he look like a snowman? She was not sure. Could it be Su Fengnian? It was said that only those who were traveling would be timid when they were close to home, but Xiamawi was not her hometown. But because of him, she stopped jumping and slowly moved towards the dragon claw pagoda tree. When she got closer, she saw the face that she had been thinking about day and night. The little girl was stunned, still biting on the steamed bun. She looked dazedly at the familiar yet unfamiliar man. She did not care about her chivalrous demeanor and etiquette as she turned and ran, the steamed bun in her hand falling to the ground.
Lu Wenbao had an expression of disbelief. Had this little girl been scared silly by His Royal Highness beside him? Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. He walked over and picked up the steamed buns that were not too dirty and held them in his arms. The little girl ran out for a while before running back. She was like a pear blossom in tears. Su Fengnian, are you going to die? My father is very capable. I'll go back and tell him. Wait for me, you must wait for me. Then she turned and planned to run again. Su Fengnian freed a hand and pressed on her little head, twisting her around. I won't die. I just felt that I had to go out and attract attention, so I had to do something unconventional. That's why I dyed my hair white. The little girl's personality was innocent, but she was not stupid. She was furious. You lied to me. Su Fengnian stuffed a steamed bun into her mouth and took one for himself. He said vaguely, Where's your family's North and South monks? Miss Li Zi took out the steamed bun and sobbed. Stupid North and South went to the palace to wait to see the emperor. They had to quarrel with that Prime Minister Xianxia and Mr. White Lotus again. Su Fengnian reached out to help her wipe away the tears on her cheeks. Her little face was red from the cold, looking very comical and cute. Su Fengnian did not have a younger sister and had always treated her as his own. He smiled gently. It's not easy to see each other, and you're already crying so much? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by North and South? Miss Li Zi said unhappily, He's so stupid. I don't even laugh at him. Su Fengnian held her cold little hand and walked down the horse. There was great joy in life, meeting an old friend in a foreign land. Su Fengnian turned and looked up gently. When someone came, they entered the Jianghu and were in high spirits. When they left, they entered the Jianghu and had a clear conscience. Su Fengnian turned and looked down at the little girl. He said calmly, It's a pity that Wenhua won't have the chance to travel the Jianghu with us. Why? Is he still so useless when it comes to swordsmanship? Or is he carrying a wooden sword? He's very promising, but he doesn't practice swordsmanship anymore. He's not in the capital? Where did he go? I'm looking for him. Humph. Wenhua didn't even wait for me. He's not loyal. If I see him in the future, I'll scold him to death. Okay, if I find that brat first, I'll scold you too. Chapter 756. On the second day of the coronation ceremony, the guards at the gate did not pay much attention to a young Taoist carrying a peach-wood sword entering the city. The Taoist priests of Mount Longhu often came to the capital to draw talismans and set up rituals. The people of the capital had seen many nobles with the same surname as the emperor. The only person at the gate who was impressed was this simple Taoist priest. He was not from Mount Longhu, the ancestral court of Taoism, nor was he a disciple of a Zhenren from a blessed place. He came from Mount Wudong, which had not been famous for hundreds of years. The Taoist priests in the world were under the control of Zhao Donxia, who was in charge of all Taoist affairs. Only Mount Wudong was an exception. After the guards at the gate let him in, they could not help but take a few more glances. They did not find out why the Zhenren did not show his face. They just thought that he was an ordinary Taoist priest who could not stand the strict rules of Mount Wudong and came to the capital to take a shortcut. After the Taoist priest entered the city, he asked for the location of the Mawei post house and walked there. He accidentally took a long detour and walked for almost 2 hours before he saw the dragon claw locust tree outside the post house. He reported his identity to the guard at the gate. Li Yufu of Mount Wudong wanted to see the crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengnian. The guard did not dare to delay and reported to the backyard in confusion. Li Yufu, who walked from Mount Wudong to the capital, did not have the demeanor of a Taoist priest. He sat on the steps outside the post house and rested for a while. He gently breathed according to the Heart Sutras of Mount Yuzhu. The old scholar Lu Wenbao glanced at him and ignored him. Su Fengnian was building the 8th snowman with Miss Li Zi in the backyard. When he heard Tong Ziliang's report, he frowned and walked to the door. Li Yufu stood up and bowed, looking a little reserved. Su Fengnian's brows relaxed and smiled. Headmaster Li, I am not worthy of your courtesy. Wudong Mountain's Li Yufu was the next Wudong sect leader after Wang Zhonglo, who had cultivated the Great Yellow Court, and Hong Xixiang, who was the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu. However, Li Yufu seemed to be even more nervous than Su Fengnian. She did not even bother to exchange pleasantries. Instead, she blushed a little. She did not look like the great spiritual master of Wudong sect, but more like a little girl who saw a handsome man. This made Su Fengnian feel confused. The few times he went up the mountain, other than the young martial granduncle who rode the bull and some naughty little Taoist children, he only saw the good-tempered Wang Zhongluo and Wang Xiaoping who demonstrated her strength with her sword. He had never even seen Li Yufu, so there were no grudges between them. It was said that Hong Shixiang had high hopes for this person, so why was he so shy? Su Fengnian suppressed his curiosity and led Li Yufu to the backyard. He was not happy at first because he was afraid of the worst result. He was worried that Li Yufu would represent Wudong Mountain to come to the capital to meet the emperor and recruit the Zhao family's emperor. Bailiang's internal affairs had been poached by the imperial court. If Wudong Mountain was added, it would really make people want to break the pot. Moreover, Su Fengnian had a very special emotional attachment to Wudong Mountain. His elder sister Su Jihu had met the cow-riding coward there. He had also practiced his blade there and received a great favor from sect leader Wang. There was also a vegetable garden that might have been barren and the great gunghorn killing note that was destined to disappear without a trace. If Wudong Mountain betrayed Bailiang, even if Bailiang could tolerate it, Su Fengnian could not. Su Fengnian entered the yard and smiled at the little girl who was lighting the snowman with charcoal. Lizi, bring a stool for the new sect leader of Wudong Mountain. The little girl quickly wiped the charcoal stains on the snowman and went to the house to bring out a stool. Li Yufu was still reserved and shy. Your Highness, I can just stand and talk. Su Fengnian looked at him seriously and took the lead to sit on the rattan chair placed under the eaves outside the house. He joked. Why are you not at all like Hong Shixiang? That guy's face is a few hundred times thicker than yours. Li Yufu hesitated for a moment and finally plucked up the courage to sit on the stool. He sat upright and looked straight ahead. There were 2 rattan chairs and 1 stool. Su Fengnian was in the middle. Shenyuan Qingfeng was lying on the chair on his left. He had no breath and looked like a living dead. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to ask about the secret. After lying down, he only smiled softly and said, Your youngest martial uncle and I are old friends. One is willing to give and the other is willing to receive. He still owes me a lot of forbidden books. He always lies to me that your eldest martial uncle Chen Yao has confiscated all of them, like a clay ox in the sea. I don't want to lower myself to his level. I don't know why I get angry every time I see him. I can't control my hands and feet. He also likes to shout that he can't hit people in the face and kick people in the balls. I don't know where he heard this Zhonghu saying. Li Yufu secretly wiped the sweat off his forehead. In the middle of winter, the young Taoist priest was surrounded by mist. It was a mysterious scene like an overseas fairy mountain. Even Lizi, who was experienced and knowledgeable, was stunned. She could not help but take a few more glances. Su Fengnian shook the rattan chair and closed his eyes. The old headmaster is really a good person. I've seen some old Taoist priests in my life, but the only one who really looks like an immortal is Headmaster Wang. The warm atmosphere was dispelled by Shenyuan Qingfeng's cold snort. Li Yufu, who was already on tenterhooks, was so scared that he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Cultivation was like entering a gold mine. How much gold one could pick up depended on one's talent, root structure, and lucky chance. Li Yufu's talent was chosen by his master, Yu Xingrui. That was why he was brought from the East Sea to Mount Wudong by Yu Xingrui, who was known as the top internal force cultivator on Jade Pillar Peak. After he came up the mountain, he was favored by all the martial uncles. As for his lucky chance, even Chen Zhao, Song Jiming, and the others did not dare to guess. Only one person left a prophecy. Wudong will prosper because of Yufu. In fact, Li Yufu was not timid. But the person he admired and respected most in his life was his youngest uncle, who used to be an immortal riding a crane and cutting fate with a sword. He admired him from the bottom of his heart. After he came up the mountain, everyone talked about how his youngest uncle and the heir of Bailiang were opposite in fate. Several of his martial uncles also said that his youngest uncle was indeed beaten in the capital, and was infinitely afraid of the heir of Bailiang. His youngest uncle's cultivation was as high as the 9th heaven. How could Li Yufu, who had been chasing after his youngest uncle for all his life, not be afraid of him? Su Fengnian turned his head and glared at Shenyuan Qingfeng, who was annoyed because he was disturbed from absorbing fate. Li Yufu did not dare to turn his head to look at the woman in purple. He only dared to lament in his heart that the women at the foot of the mountain were all tigers. His youngest uncle was right.
Su Fengnian asked with a smile. I heard that Bei Mang's sword Qi went to Mount Wudong and asked for Ancestor Lu's flying sword technique. He asked your Mount Wudong to answer the sword on behalf of Ancestor Lu. He fought his way to the top of Big Lotus Peak, but was forced back to the foot of the mountain by you. Li Yufu said in a low voice, I lost my head in anger and acted on impulse. In fact, my swordsmanship is not as good as that sword Qi's. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I guess your swordsmanship is not as good as Huang Qing's. But the level of sword principle is related to swordsmanship, but not absolutely. Huang Qing asked for swordsmanship and sword principle, so it's not surprising that you lost. It's like a woman with a good-looking face. She can be more beautiful, but how beautiful she is depends on the most important thing, her temperament. Li Yufu thought about it carefully and said sincerely, Your Highness is right. I've learned a lot. Su Fengnian said jokingly, Do you really think I'm some kind of Taoist master? You're so smart. Even if I fart out of boredom, you'll be able to figure out something. Li Yufu, don't be so suspicious. The reason why I dared to beat Hong Shixiang back then was not because my cultivation was higher than his, but because he was narrow-minded. Li Yufu said seriously, Your Highness is well-mannered. Su Fengnian held his belly and laughed. Oh when you flatter someone, you're just like a bull rider. You're so sincere. No wonder you're from the same origin. Li Yufu's face turned slightly red. Su Fengnian asked, You walked to the capital on 2 legs? Li Yufu nodded and said, I went to the Earthlung Mountain in the middle. Su Fengnian said playfully, My second sister once took a few bags of dragon sand from the Earthlung Mountain. She said that an evil dragon appeared in the first blessed land of Taoism. Did you go to slay the evil dragon? Li Yufu smiled and did not deny or admit it. Su Fengnian was shocked. He glanced at the peach wood sword on the back of the new chief of Wudong. Li Yufu scratched his head. I did see the evil dragon, but I didn't kill it. I was hindered by someone. Su Fengnian nodded and said slowly, For yesterday's ceremony, Taiyan City specially worshipped Zhenwu Great Emperor behind the 3 main halls of the central axis. The statue was huge, like a small mountain. There was no other god worshipped in the capital. The Son of Heaven wrote the words controlling the central axis on the plaque to raise the status of Wudong Mountain in Taoism. You and I both know about this. Li Yufu took a deep breath and said frankly, Wudong Mountain had no objection to the imperial court statue of Zhenwu Great Emperor in Taiyan City. But according to the teachings of Ancestor Lu, the Taoists on the mountain were not allowed to enter the capital to seek power. But for some reason, after the statue was carved, it swayed without wind. So I followed my master's order to enter the capital to investigate. On my way to the east, I sensed that it had something to do with the Earthlung Mountain. So I went to the blessed land and found the evil dragon hibernating there. Speaking of this, Li Yufu stood up and said in a low voice, I'm willing to cultivate for the sake of the common people. Su Fengnian smiled and looked at the sky. Such a young immortal. Chapter 757. The second chapter was at 3 in the morning. The third chapter was at around 5 in the morning. There was one more chapter at night. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, When will you go to the palace to meet the emperor? Li Yufu shook his head and said, Since the evil dragon of Earthlung Mountain has been slain, the statue of Zhenwu Great Emperor on the central axis should no longer be a bad omen. I will not go to the palace and damage my cultivation. Chief Uncle Master once told me that there are 7 injuries in our cultivation. One of them is that we do not follow the rules and reveal our innocence. If we violate this rule, it will be difficult for us to be listed as an immortal even if we have a strange appearance. Although I do not expect to be listed as an immortal in Tianmen, I am also timid. I am afraid to go to the place with the strongest dragon Qi and Yin Qi in the world. I came to the capital this time just to see His Highness and hear more about the 2 chief leaders. After leaving the capital, I will travel around and will not be in a hurry to return to Wudong. If I want to travel 100,000 miles in 10 years, it will be difficult for me to meet one and eliminate one. Wudong Mountain did not appear, but once it did, it would become an immortal. First, there was Wang Zhonglo who concealed his identity and traveled in Jianghu. He helped people in danger and broke the Kanglin with one finger. Later, there was Hong Shixiang who used his flying sword to suppress the dragon and tiger. He was regarded by the Qi cultivators as an existence that could suppress Wufu Wang Xianji. Su Fengnian joked, If you meet a girl you like in Jianghu and become an immortal Taoist companion, or even give up being a Taoist priest and not return to Wudong Mountain, your master and uncle masters will be so angry that they will vomit blood." Li Yufu blushed and said, "I don't dare." Su Fengnian caught the loophole in his words and said, "You don't." Li Yufu said sincerely, "I'm not as good as Uncle Master. I'm not good at divination, so I don't know the mysteries of heaven. I don't dare to say what will happen in the future. Although I don't know many things in the world, I know what I should do. If I meet a girl I like, I can only forget about her in Jianghu." Su Fengnian remained silent. Li Yufu did not know the ways of the world and did not know how to warm up the atmosphere. He could only stand up and bid farewell. Su Fengnian came back to his senses and stood up as well to send him to the door. Li Yufu, who carried an ordinary peachwood sword on his back, hesitated for a moment. He pointed at the old pagoda tree and said softly, "Your Highness, do you know that a Qi cultivator has done something to the Dragonclaw pagoda tree?" Su Fengnian shook his head, his eyes gloomy. Li Yufu was relieved and did not ask any more questions. He condensed his qi and exhaled. The 7 steps of gang treading, the peachwood sword that had no murderous aura was slowly unsheathed and inserted into the root of the Dragonclaw locust tree. The current Wudong sect leader stretched out his fingers and made a gesture. He whispered, "Draw the ghost and draw the evil." Lu Wenbao was shocked and hurried away from the Dragonclaw locust tree. The old Confucian scholar had learned a variety of things. He was skeptical about the yin and yang divination Taoism, but he did not dare to underestimate it. He opened his eyes widely and only saw the young Taoist show a good swordsmanship. After that, there was no movement. Lu Wenbao was very disappointed. Li Yufu frowned and approached the pagoda tree. He bent his right thumb and cut his index finger. The blood kept flowing. He drew a talisman on the tree trunk and patted it gently. The talisman disappeared. Li Yufu's expression did not relax but became more dignified. After thinking for a while, he crossed his palms. The left thumb was curled in the palm and the other 9 fingers were exposed. Su Fengnian was a layman when it came to Taoism talismans. Shenyuan Qingfeng, who was behind him, said calmly, "This Taoist is using the Tai lion spell. It is said that Lord Tai's mount is a 9-headed lion, so there is this spell. Previously, he was using the exorcism skill, while the lion spell is the skill of inviting the god. If the Taoist Immortal of Dragon Tiger Mountain wanted to do it in one go, it would take half an hour. This shows that this Taoist is not weak. Why is he so submissive in front of you? Is he really the current Wudong sect leader?" Su Fengnian ignored him. Li Yufu, who was very good-tempered, seemed to have found the clue after probing and realized the truth. He was angry for the first time. He is obviously orthodox, but he uses the unorthodox way. Li Yufu waved his sleeves and the peachwood sword under his feet rose from the ground. He flew toward the imperial palace. His hands made an obscure spell that even Shenyuan Qingfeng did not recognize. He looked solemn and said in a low voice, "Li Yufu, the 36th sect leader of Wudong, welcomes Zhenwu." After the 3 main halls of the imperial palace, there was Zhenwu. The majestic statue was 3 stories high. Zhenwu the great emperor guarded the north and ruled the black tortoise. He was wearing golden armor and holding a sword, stepping on turtles and snakes. Since Li Yufu rushed to Earthlung Mountain to fight the evil dragon, the statue of Zhenwu no longer shook. Prime Minister Qingci Zhao Danping, who had been guarding here, was also free. He did not have to wait here all day and worry about the statue collapsing. At this time, Zhao Danping was following His Majesty to the statue of Zhenwu the Great Emperor. Besides this great celestial master, there was also Bai Yu, an outsider of the celestial master residence, who was given to Mr. White Lotus by the emperor. There was also Zhao Ningxian, a young Taoist with the surname Ning, who often got lost in Dragon Tiger Mountain. He blocked the sword of the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai when he climbed the mountain. It was also Zhao Ningxian who wrote the Laozi's beard scripture, which slandered Buddhism and created a trend for the imperial court to destroy Buddhism. The group of people did not look mighty, but their momentum was unparalleled. The emperor of the Zhao family, the 3 great celestial masters of Dragon Tiger Mountain, Sun Tonglu, who was already the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate and the internal officials directorate, and several people who were in their 30s. The new crown prince, Zhao Zhuan, was also among them. He was asking Mr. White Lotus for advice on cultivation. There was a debate between Buddhism and Taoism just now. The emperor of the Zhao family did not take sides.
He just listened quietly and did not say a word. Although it was a debate, the monk with the strange Buddhist name, Ichan, was more like chatting with Bai Yu. If Zhao Zhuan did not make the final decision, Zhao Zhuan, who had been listening for nearly 4 hours, would have been sleepy. He turned his head several times to yawn. Empress Zhao Ji, who was present at that time, saw it and gave him a few fierce glances. Zhao Danping and Zhao Ningxin looked at a certain place in the south of the city almost at the same time. Chapter 758. Mr. White Lotus, who had read too much, squinted his eyes and realized the emergency situation. He glanced at Zhao Ningxin, who he thought highly of. Zhao Ningxin secretly stretched out his hand and quickly pinched his fingers. Zhao Danping did not even try to hide her anger. In the eyes of outsiders, the Taoist master of Longhu Mountain was bursting with righteousness, like a heavenly immortal in a thunderous rage. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan, who had been indifferent to the matter, finally came to his senses and looked around. If the common people saw such a frivolous crown prince, they would be worried about whether the world would be peaceful in the future. The statue of Zhenwu, which had been motionless for a long time, began to shake again. This time, it shook more and more violently than before. Many of the hidden talisman arrays on the ground around the statue were pulled out and destroyed. Sun Tonglu had no time to be rude. He stood in front of the emperor to protect him, fearing that the statue would collapse. Zhao Danping flicked the tail of her white sword that was wrapped around her arm. She leaped forward and stepped on the eye of the array. She tried to stabilize the secret array that she had carefully set up. Unfortunately, she was not strong enough this time. The statue of Zhenwu the Great lost its roots and slowly slid toward the south. Zhao Danping's face was pale. She looked up and saw a peachwood sword flying toward her. The tip of the sword turned toward the south, as if it wanted to follow Zhenwu the Great to the south. The emperor of Zhao family looked normal and said softly, "Master Lu Hao, destroy that sword." The celestial state master who contributed the most in the case of white clothes quietly appeared behind the emperor. Zhao Danping tried her best to suppress the fluctuating formation map. She turned her head and said worriedly, "Your Majesty, don't act rashly on the peach sword that has already entered the formation. Otherwise, the statue may collapse." The emperor was expressionless and just stared at the minister who was good at writing beautiful poems. Sweat oozed from Zhao Danping's forehead. Crown Prince Zhao Ji chuckled, which was particularly harsh. Zhao Ningxin, who always gave people the impression that he did not care about anything, slowly walked out and blocked the path of the statue. He looked up at the highest god worshipped by the imperial court and asked a ridiculous and childish question, "Who are you going to see?" The statue of Zhenwu the Great Emperor continued to slide to the south. Zhao Danping's footsteps were forcibly dragged to the south. The emperor asked softly, "Mr. White Lotus, can you tell me who Zhenwu is? Isn't he the second son of the Su family who was born with the strength of dragons and elephants?" Bai Yu, who was dressed in plain white hemp clothes and shoes, shook his head and said apologetically, "Old celestial master Zhao Shituan has always believed so. But Bai Yu doesn't look like it. He thinks it's more like an evil dragon. As for who it is, Bai Yu doesn't have the ability to predict the future, so I really can't guess." "Oh," the empress said. He was not angry and continued to ask, "Then who could create such a phenomenon?" Bai Yu smiled and said, "Bai Yu knows about this." Looking at the style of the peach wood sword, it's ancestor Lu's sword that has been passed down from generation to generation by the Wudong Taoists. When I was young, I admired ancestor Lu's sword Immortal style and personally carved one. However, due to my limited talent, I was unable to practice the sword. If I'm not mistaken, this Qi refinement warrior of Wudong should be Li Yufu, the new leader of Zhanlong at Earthlung Mountain. The emperor's face darkened. It's fine if this Taoist doesn't meet me in the capital. After all, Wudong has an ancestral rule of not entering the palace since ancient times. But Hong Shixiong broke into the city because of his strength, and this person was rude and disrespectful. Does he really think that my great peace city is a brothel? Does he think that he can come and go as he pleases just because he has some family background? Bai Yu laughed it off and did not elaborate. Even though he was half blind, he was still one of the most discerning people in the world. Senior Zhao Danping of the Celestial Master Residence worked together with a large group of Qi cultivators from the Imperial Astronomer. They used the Dragon Claw Locust Tree from Mawei as bait and the statue of Zhenwu as a catalyst. They tried to suppress the Crown Prince of the Northern Liang during his temporary stay in the hostel. They also tried to exhaust his fate as if they were using a millstone to crush him to death. Bai Yu did not dislike this kind of emperor's hegemony, but he did not admire it either. He wanted to stay out of it.
The art of war advocated the balance between the strange and the proper.
This was the first strange, which was relatively hidden and obscure. The remaining one was obvious at a glance. Between the relationship between Wudong Mountain and Bailiang, if Wudong was tactful and took the opportunity to curry favor with the imperial court, then Bailiang, which was already revered as a Buddha, would completely lose the support of Taoism and become more isolated and helpless. The imperial court made an exception to promote the people who betrayed Bailiang in order to make the Su family a loner. As long as Su Shao died, Su Fengnian, who had inherited the title of king of Bailiang, could only use 300,000 cavalry to fill the hole in the northwest gate. He could not do anything else. Bai Yu sighed. It was a pity that Wudong Mountain was still stubborn and did not want to do any superficial work. It was no wonder that they had declined to this extent and could not compete with the rising Longhu Mountain. First, it was the battle between two Zen temples and Longhu Mountain. Wudong Mountain fought Longhu Mountain. This was the battle for the ancestral court of Taoism. Even if they won this battle, they would lose the entire temple. Wudong Mountain would lose too much if they won. Bai Yu shouted to Zhao Ningxin, "Ningxin, come back!" Zhao Ningxin hesitated for a moment and finally walked sideways to the south route of the statue of Zhenwu Great Emperor. While speaking, Bai Yu quietly waved his hand. Most of the others were paying attention to Zhao Ningxin's actions, but only Zhao Danping noticed Bai Yu's gesture. He gritted his teeth and removed the defense of the array. Outside the Mawei post house, Su Fengnian asked with a smile, "Someone did something to the dragon-clawed locust tree. Do they have bad intentions against me?" Li Yufu nodded with a dignified expression. Su Fengnian asked, "Is it related to fate?" Li Yufu still nodded. Su Fengnian, whose fortune was as white as a piece of paper, almost burst into laughter. He held back his laughter and said, "All right, don't piss off those Zhao family people. Just focus on your 100,000 miles journey. You don't need to care about these dirty things. Take back the peachwood sword and leave the capital." Li Yufu blushed and said, "The peachwood sword is in the array. It's hard to take it back." At the end of the long street outside the post house, a middle-aged swordsman in a green robe appeared. He carried a sword on his back. Walking slowly, his face was simple like an ancient necromancer. He bowed to the new chief of Wudong Mountain. Li Yufu hurriedly returned the bow and said respectfully, "Greetings, Uncle Wang." Wang Xiaoping, who had been cultivating his sword for 20 years. Wang Xiaoping was unhappy. Obviously, he was not happy that the young chief was involved in the battle of the dynasty. Li Yufu was simple, but he was not stupid. He was embarrassed at the moment. Su Fengnian did not expect Wang Xiaoping, the best swordsman of Wudong Mountain, to appear in the Mawei post. Li Yufu explained, "Uncle Wang left his last words. When your highness enters the capital, Brother Wang will enter the world." Wang Xiaoping took off the talisman sword Xinshu and threw it to Su Fengnian. He said in a hoarse voice, "Both brother and brother have said that they will see you in the capital." Su Fengnian took the famous sword. He did not have time to guess why Wang Xiaoping was willing to speak. He asked in surprise, "What can I do with the Xinshu?" Since Wang Xiaoping spoke, did it mean that his swordsmanship had reached the Dashang level? But the most famous mute in Jianghu was a man of few words and did not speak anymore. Li Yufu scratched his head and said, "Uncle Wang once said that I can see Zhenwu, and Zhenwu can see me." Su Fengnian was even more confused. Suddenly, the Xinshu in his hand trembled, like Zhenwu the great emperor's urgent order. For some reason, Su Fengnian turned his head and looked to the north. He said softly, "Sword, come." Li Yufu's peachwood sword flew to the south and returned to the scabbard. Su Fengnian said in his heart, "Sword, go." The Xinshu flew to the north and returned to the hand of the statue of Zhenwu the great emperor. Wang Xiaoping, who was conceited as a genius in swordsmanship, bowed respectfully to the white-haired young man. Even Li Yufu, who was talented, had tears in his eyes at this time. Zhenwu had not been seen on Wudong Mountain for 800 years. Zhenwu finally saw me today. Chapter 759. The next chapter will probably be after 5 o'clock. Li Yufu had left the capital as fast as he could, away from the troublesome place. Wang Xiaoping, the sword maniac without Xinshu, stayed in the courier station. He would probably be cursed for being an accomplice to evil in the future. Wang Xiaoping entered a side room and closed the door, refusing to see anyone. Then the little monk, Bei Nan, hurriedly ran to the dismount way.
He scratched his bald head when he saw His Royal Highness' miserable state.
Su Fengnian didn't say much about his dangerous quarrel in the palace. They agreed to leave the capital together and go to the two Zen temples. Unexpectedly, the little monk shook his head and said, "Master asked me to go with His Highness to Bailiang and teach him the method of epiphany." Su Fengnian asked in surprise, "If you didn't go to the capital to meet the emperor, it would be fine. But if you go to Bailiang with me as soon as you leave the capital, wouldn't it be tantamount to declaring that the two Zen temples have completely fallen out with the imperial court? Aren't you afraid that the imperial court will close the main gate of the two Zen temples in anger?" Miss Li Zi didn't want to deal with these things. She was focused on making snowmen in the courtyard. After the snow in the backyard was used up, she had asked Su Fengnian to go to the outer courtyard and even the streets to shovel the snow and put it in baskets back to the courtyard. She had already made 30 snowmen of different sizes. It was a magnificent sight. Bainan grinned. "Master said it's okay to close the temple. The monks in the temple won't starve to death anyway. It's only natural that we feel full and warm. Only when we suffer will we be sincere." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Your master is very open-minded." Bainan looked worried.
"I'm afraid I can't explain Master's epiphany well."
Su Fengnian was bored to death on the rattan chair.
He said with a casual expression, "Bainan, why don't you and Li Zi not go to Bailiang?
Or when I miss you, I'll invite you to Bailiang as guests." Miss Li Zi had already used up all the accumulated snow and successfully made the last snowman.
She patted her frozen red hands and walked over.
When she heard this, she was stunned. She wanted to refute aggressively, but then she thought of something. She was so scared that her face turned pale and she hesitated. Apparently, she had remembered the nightmare of the stupid Nanbei who had left after becoming a Buddha. Su Fengnian said calmly, "I believe in fate.
I'd rather believe in it than not.
But believing in it doesn't mean that I have to accept my fate. I don't care what your master, Li Zi's father, thinks. If you dare to go to Bailiang, I can tie you up and throw you to the South Sea or the East Sea. Bailiang is indeed the easiest place to spread the enlightenment of the Dharma. But you also said that one's heart is more sincere when one is suffering. Then go to a place other than Bailiang to suffer. Bailiang, we will not open this door to you for the time being." Apart from talking about the Dharma, the little monk Nanbei, who was stupid in everything else, was suddenly in a dilemma. Su Fengnian did not give them a chance to think. He continued to say mercilessly, "You should leave the capital immediately, so that you won't be implicated by me." Miss Li Zi's eyes were red and she bit her lips. Su Fengnian said with a straight face, "Don't you understand the order to leave?" Miss Li Zi said with a crying voice, "I haven't seen you for a while and your hair has turned white. What if you die next time? I only have two friends, you and Wenhua. What do you want me to do if I can't find Wenhua?" Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. The stupid Nanbei put his palms together and walked to east and west. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and said softly, "You can go through Shishu and enter Nanzhao. You can go all the way to the South Sea. The road is difficult, but it's relatively safe." Miss Li Zi had just grown up and turned from a girl to a woman. This time, she did not act coquettishly or pester him. She turned her head and wiped her tears. She sniffled and said softly, "Then I'm leaving." Su Fengnian kept his eyes closed and his heart of stone. She finally moved to the door of the backyard.
She turned her head and said, "I'm really leaving."
Su Fengnian was indifferent. Shenyuan Qingfeng quietly rolled his eyes. After a while, Shenyuan Qingfeng did not know whether to laugh or cry. A small head poked out of the door with tears in his eyes. Then, a bald head also sneakily poked out. Su Fengnian stood up abruptly, and his two heads went back into hiding. Su Fengnian stepped over the threshold. Seeing her back to him, he walked over and twisted her ear. He turned her around and lowered his head with a gentle smile. "In the past, it was always me who gave you gifts. This time, when you go to the South Sea with Nanbei, remember to help me pick out a few gifts. When we meet in the future, I'll ask you for them. I'm tacky. I'll give you the most expensive gifts."
Miss Li Zi lowered her head and said, "Oh."
Su Fengnian turned to Monk Nanbei and said with a smile, "Then I'll leave this sister to you. Take good care of her. Remember, 10,000 pounds of rouge and face powder can't compare to a living person. Monk Nanbei nodded. After seeing them off at the entrance of the Xiama Wei post house, Su Fengnian only waved his hand and turned around, leaving behind a crying young girl and a young monk who was at a loss of what to do. Back in the yard, Su Fengnian squatted in front of a knee-high snowman. He was lost in thought. His second sister, Su Weisheng, had been strange since she was young. When she was young, she had once carved the words, "Banishment to 3,000 miles," on the back of Zhenwu the Great Emperor's statue on Mount Wudong. At that time, the Taoist priests on Mount Wudong treated her as a child and acted without restraint. Now that he thought about it, it could be said that the prophecy had come true. Shenyuan Qingfeng asked, "You're the reincarnation of Zhenwu the Great Emperor?" Su Fengnian said indifferently, "None of the people around me have good karma. My mother lost the land sword Immortal, my eldest sister's life was full of misfortune, my second sister almost died of plum wine, my master Li Yishan died of illness, and my younger brother might enter the finger mystery realm for me. Aren't you afraid?" Shenyuan Qingfeng laughed from the bottom of his heart like a madman. The word, miserable, doesn't even begin to describe it. "I'm so happy that I'm about to die." Su Fengnian exhaled heavily. He didn't care about the crazy woman's gloating. He stood up and said, "Let's go home." The world's #1 talisman sword, Shintu, returned to Zhenwu the Great Emperor. Zhao Donping's expression was uncertain. She silently calculated the heavenly secrets, but she couldn't even find a clue. Mr. White Lotus sucked in a breath of cold air and said in a questioning tone, "Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping." Sun Tonglu and the other workers subconsciously lowered their heads and looked at their feet. They didn't dare to take another look at this scene, which they didn't know if it was a bad omen or an auspicious sign. Zhao Ningxin, whose face resembled an ancestor of Mount Longhu, stood there in a daze, muttering and shaking his head. After Mount Longhu suppressed Wudong, purple and gold lotuses bloomed in the dragon pond. Mount Longhu's Taoist masters were also full of talents, and there was a tradition that the surname Zhao and the surname Zhao complemented each other. After Qi Xuanzhen slew the demon, Qi Xianxia, who wielded a horsetail whisk as a sword, became famous in Jianghu. He was said to have the potential to become one of the top swordsmen of the generation. His name was Ji Miao. Qi Xianxia was indeed chivalrous and had the air of an immortal. In addition, the 4 great celestial masters with the surname Zhao were still alive. Zhao Danping was in the capital, and the junior Zhao Ningxin had appeared out of nowhere. Moreover, with Mr. White Lotus's assistance, Mount Longhu's luck could be said to be quite prosperous. However, although they looked good, the celestial master's residence was worried. There weren't many lotuses left in the dragon pond, and they were still showing signs of withering. This puzzled the celestial master's residence. His Majesty calmly said to Zhao Danping, "Celestial Master Zhao, go to the imperial astronomer." Zhao Danping accepted the order and hurriedly left. Chapter 760. Even though Zhao Zhuan had become the crown prince, he still had the same carefree attitude as when he was a refined prince. The emperor turned his head and smiled. "Zhuan, take Mr. White Lotus and Attentive Spirit to walk around. If there's anything wrong, write a report to me later. Remember, don't ask anyone to write it for you." Zhao Zhuan nodded bitterly. As the crown prince and the 2 Taoist priests strolled around the palace aimlessly, Zhao Zhuan suddenly smiled and asked, "Mr. White Lotus, what if the eldest son of the Su family is the Zhenwu Great Emperor? Wouldn't that be troublesome?" Bai Yu chuckled and said, "Be an immortal in heaven and a human on earth. If that's the case, it's fine." 800 years ago, the Emperor of Great Qin reincarnated as the Zhenwu Great Emperor, but he still couldn't unify Beimang. He could only pass away with regret like a mortal. Zhao Zhuan asked a very sharp question. "Master, the world envies immortals for their immortality. In the past dynasties, there have been emperors begging for alchemists to refine pills or visit immortals, but none of them are immortal. There hasn't even been an emperor who lived past 100 years. Since Mount Longhu is the ancestral court of Taoism, has there ever been a senior Taoist master who truly achieved immortality? I don't really believe in the Taoist scriptures about ascension. Do you believe it, Mr. White Lotus?" According to the laws of the Liyang sect, the crown prince could call himself Gu. Mr. White Lotus laughed and said, "Bai Yu was brought to Mount Longhu by my master when he was young. He once asked him if there were immortals in the world. I'll only repeat what my master said. He said that Taoists seek the great Tao when they cultivate, just like those herbalists who go up the mountain to gather herbs. Some people are lazy, but sometimes they're destined. They go into the mountain to gather rare herbs and return with a full load. There's Hongxixiang in Wudong, and Mount Longhu where Bai Yu is from. But most people are rewarded by the heavenly Tao. Sometimes it doesn't, but they still gain something in the end. The 4 Taoist masters are like that. They become living immortals in the eyes of the outside world and are only a step away from becoming Taoist masters. Even more people returned empty-handed. However, if they frequently climbed the mountain, not to mention picking herbs, they would be able to look at the mountain scenery and broaden their horizons. They would feel relaxed and happy. If they walked the difficult mountain paths that they rarely walked, they could also train their bodies and prolong their lives. In the previous dynasty, there were indeed many lousy alchemists who used the art of immortality to charm the emperor and confuse the imperial court. To Bai Yu, this was harmful, and the people of the future should be aware of it. However, Mount Longhu's inner core cultivation method did not use the word immortality to confuse the masses. Regardless of whether it was the emperor, ministers, or commoners, they could all learn it.
That's why when His Majesty first summoned me to the capital, he asked me with a smile like the Crown Prince did, whether there was a carefree immortal or a supreme art of immortality.
I said no. In fact, Bai Yu was a cultivator and naturally believed in the existence of immortality. The emperor's duty was not to seek the heavenly blessings, but to seek the peace of the world. The art of immortality was against the will of the heavens. The emperor was called the Son of Heaven because he was blessed by the heavens. Therefore, to achieve immortality was extremely difficult and was not favored by the heavens. The movement of the stars, the flow of the rivers, the imperial court, life and death all followed the 2 words, etiquette. In the current dynasty, Confucianism was ranked higher than Taoism because of its benevolence and righteousness. It was indeed the best medicine to govern a country. However, there was no medicine in the world that could cure all diseases. Taoism's calmness was another medicine. The Buddhism of the Central Plains was also another medicine. His Majesty did not destroy the true Buddhas, but the fake Buddhas. Was it not for the sake of allowing the Crown Prince to pardon the Buddhists when he ascends the throne? Good medicine is bitter, but His Majesty's heart is also bitter. The Crown Prince hides his strength and bides his time. His Majesty understands the essence of Huang Lao, but you must be considerate. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan had been absent-minded when he was listening to the debate between Buddhism and Taoism. Now that Bai Yu was speaking, he was completely focused, not missing a single word. He looked around and saw that there was no one around. He said softly, "Father sees Prime Minister Qingxi Zhao Danping as a performer, but I do not dare to treat Mr. White Lotus like that. I hope that Mr. White Lotus can enter the court and become an official. You do not seek immortality, but the good fortune of the people." His Majesty. Naturally, it was when he, Zhao Zhuan, ascended the throne. Bai Yu smiled faintly, not saying anything. Zhao Zhuan also smiled knowingly. Zhao Ningxian was still daydreaming, turning a deaf ear to the conversation between the Crown Prince and Mr. White Lotus. Zhao Zhuan led the 2 Taoists to the imperial astronomer and left. Mr. White Lotus looked at the extraordinarily tall building of the imperial astronomer and asked softly, "Have you calculated it?" Zhao Ningxian nodded and said, "It is Su Fengnian without a doubt." Bai Yu was neither surprised nor happy. Instead, he looked a little sad and muttered to himself, "No wonder the first Taoist master of Mount Longhu appeared in the spirit dragon pool and left a prophecy of a horse trampling on dragons and tigers. However, even the kings of the human world do not meet the king. Liyang is the gathering of the 3 talents of heaven, earth, and man. No wonder Su Fengnian is so miserable. Among the people you care about, has any one of them ever achieved a perfect ending?" Bai Yu sighed and patted the shoulder of the young Taoist beside him. "Solitary hidden Zhao Huangchao can even raise an evil dragon in the Earth-Lung Mountain. I don't believe that you and I can't do it." 50 miles away from the capital city, there was a small town. Back when the Liang dynasty pacified the Central Plains, they took in all kinds of rich men and craftsmen. Before the city was expanded, most of the people could only stay outside the city. After a long time, the place was taken over by other forces. This hidden dragon town was not far from the capital city. It was quite prosperous. It was surrounded by mountains and rivers. Some of the mansions in good areas were still occupied by the nobles in the capital city. They were used for strolling in spring, avoiding heat, and enjoying the snow in autumn. In a quiet inn in the hidden dragon town, an old man with a head full of silver hair came. He was not extravagant, but his aura was extraordinary. The shopkeeper and waiters were all intimidated by him. Usually, when the old man in gray sat alone to eat and drink, no one dared to approach him. Then, another pair of guests came and sat at the same table as the old man in gray. The woman was as beautiful as a fairy. She carried a slender and beautiful red sandalwood sword box on her back. She was like a beauty who walked out of a painting. Unfortunately, she had a fierce aura that kept people away. The middle-aged Confucian scholar who looked like a servant had white hair. He sat opposite the old man in the conference. The old man in gray said calmly, "Chao Chongqing, you have crossed the threshold of celestial phenomenon and become a Confucian saint. Are you here to show off? Or are you here to stop me from killing Su Fengnian?" The Confucian saint smiled calmly. "Coincidentally, I was waiting for Su Fengnian to return something. I just wanted to catch up with you on the way. I won't interfere with the grudges between the two of you." Han Diaoxi, whose head was full of snow, glanced at the princess of West Chu, Xianxia. He retracted his gaze. "Although I, Han Diaoxi, am a eunuch, I know that His Majesty will not mistreat the people of the world. Although you, Chao Chongqing, are not selfish, you are harming the world for the sake of the country." "Restore the country? Even if you are a land immortal, can you really restore it?" Chao Chongqing shook his head and said, "You don't know anything about human affairs." Han Diaoxi sneered. He stood up and said ferociously, "Tell Su Fengnian that we will have a life-and-death battle between us within 500 miles and 1,000 miles. Chao Chongqing did not say anything. Han Diaoxi threw a bag of silver on the table and walked out of the inn. Chao Chongqing looked at the princess. She said calmly, "He can only be killed by me." Chao Chongqing felt a headache. Han Diaoxi may not be able to kill Su Fengnian. The young woman who was riding a sword like a fairy said calmly, "I mean what I say." Chao Chongqing, who was a Confucian saint who could even block Gu Jiantong's thunder of mind, could do nothing about it. Chapter 761. 3 chapters, 11,000 words, have been uploaded. These are not included in today's update. So there is one more chapter tonight. Before the 6 vassal kings and the new kings left the capital, 2 carriages left Great Peace City quietly. The coachmen were Blue Bird and the young death warrior Wu. Lu Wenbao had finally succeeded. The old Confucian who had endured the cold for several days was finally able to sit in the carriage. Facing him was that sword maniac Wang Xiaoping. Lu Wenbao had originally wanted to ask this Jianghu master, who was known as the #1 swordsman on Wudong Mountain, for advice on how to maintain one's health. But when he saw Wang Xiaoping's lifeless appearance, he gave up on the idea. He didn't want to annoy this Zhenren and be mistaken by the crown prince of Bailiang that he was trying to climb up the ranks. The appetite of officialdom was too big. Not being content was a big taboo. Lu Wenbao had been poor for most of his life. He had never eaten pork, but he had seen pigs run. After waiting for so long and seeing the moon, not only did he not become arrogant, he only dared to cherish his fortune and fate. Leaving the city gate of Great Peace City, Lu Wenbao lifted the curtain and poked his head out to look back. His expression was complicated. It would be a lie to say that he didn't regret not being able to become a proper official of the temple. But to be able to display his tyrannical skills in Bailiang, the northwest gate of the dynasty, that little bit of regret was nothing. Lu Wenbao put down the curtain. His old face bloomed with a bright smile. He fiercely rubbed his face until it was burning and painful. Leaning against the wall of the carriage, he said to himself, "Before the flowers bloom in Bailiang, can I, Lu Wenbao, have my own carriage? Heh, that's all we can hope for. The size of the official's hat, whether he's in the mainstream or not, we don't even need to think about it. It's fine as long as he's an official." In the front carriage, Su Fengnian and Shenyuan Qingfeng were sitting cross-legged facing each other. Between them was a rowan wood chessboard that Tong Ziliang had bought for them. The pieces were brand new. Nowadays, those who revered the past and devalued the present had no face to take it out for guests if they didn't have a chessboard that had been used by national chess masters. Therefore, even though this chessboard was both beautiful and made good, it wasn't expensive. Shenyuan Qingfeng was only an amateur to chess. Fortunately, Su Fengnian also placed his pieces randomly and managed to match his opponent. Otherwise, given Shenyuan Qingfeng's stubbornness and competitiveness, he wouldn't be in the mood to play chess with Su Fengnian. Xianyuan Qingfeng's chess skills were mediocre, but he excelled in his intelligence and persistence. Every time he placed a piece, he would be calculative and calculate over and over again. Now that he had reached a bottleneck, he wasn't in a hurry to place a piece. He held a round black piece between his fingers and looked at the chessboard. If Mount Hui crosses the bottom line of the imperial court one day and is surrounded by the purge army, will you abandon me? Su Fengnian leaned against the wall of the carriage and placed one hand on the cold box of chess pieces.
You won't believe me even if I say I won't.
Xianyuan Qingfeng's thoughts were like antelope horns. You're really good to that, Miss Li. This is the first time I've seen you treat an outsider like this. Su Fengnian teased. Jealous.